Good morning and welcome to a special work session of the Ann Arbor City Council with respect to police chief candidate interviews. We have a set of interviews today with prospective candidates for the position of, or actual candidates, prospective chiefs for our police chief. And so without further ado, Dr. Watson, I believe, welcome to Ann Arbor. What we'll be doing here today, as I suspect you've been briefed, is I will be reading to you a bunch of questions. We'll be grateful for your answers. There will not be follow-up within the answer set, but if the answer set concludes before the time is expired, then follow-ups could happen.
Okay.
How's that?
That is great.
Awesome. So, first off, number zero, welcome.
Thank you.
Number one, how have the principles from the 21st Century Policing Report impacted your leadership approach, especially in light of disproportionate harms suffered by people of color?
Thank you. That's a good question. I have a myriad of experience when you speak about leadership and policing. So it has positively impacted my leadership ability in different areas. As the director in the city of Sacramento, have oversight over the police department as well as the fire department. So one of the things that is incumbent upon my office is to make sure that our policies and our training and actually the implementation of those match when we're dealing with the public and their interactions with the community. One of the things that we're weak in and that we are focused on right now is improper search and seizure with our less marginalized communities in Sacramento. That's one of the largest complaints that my office sees on a daily basis when you talk about allegations of misconduct with the Sacramento Police Department. So one of the things we found is a pattern of officers unable to actually, I would say, function in a manner that they should. So we learn things in the academy, the laws, the state laws, federal laws, local ordinances, but to apply that in the field during public interactions, because of the overturn of a lack of retention in Sacramento Police Department, they're having quite a bit of issue with that. So what it has arisen to from an audit that was conducted by my office is our policies are not what they should be. Our training must be modified. That in turn, we need follow through as well to ensure that what they're learning in training and what our policies are is being followed in the field. So a big win for making those necessary steps for the public to see actual change and fruition in what they have complained about and what they're talking about. As a chief of police, it's a little different. From my experience as a chief of police, paying attention to that on the front end instead of having an oversight entity, because that's what I am right now, to come in and look at that. So I went to the state of Nevada, and it was a major reform effort to come and overhaul the entire police department. One of the biggest issues that I had was use of force. And so having more than 4 officer-involved shootings in less than 2.5 weeks led to an issue with not only just the use of force policy, but our tactics. And one of the biggest issues that I determined was officers causing or our actions or our tactics causing the shooting because we had 14 different officers in my city that shot a suicidal subject. So he was wanting to kill himself. And we wound up shooting him, and it was 14 different officers, which led to bad tactics because that's not what you do when you have a suicidal subject. So coming from different leadership experiences and having to analyze what the root causes of our problems were. And so from the chief of police standpoint, tactics are very important too, not just policies and training as well.
Thank you. Second question. Please discuss your approach to ensuring transparency, especially during high-profile incidents, including the role that the chief should play in communicating to the community.
Thank you. My philosophy goes back before a controversial incident happens. In policing, we know that it's not a matter of if something will happen, it's a matter of when. So it's incumbent upon us to have that connectivity with all elements and all different communities within our area. And that's one of the problems we normally have is that we make a lot of withdrawals out of the community by different things that we do carrying out our duties, but we do not have enough deposits. And what I mean by that is that when we ensure that we're building sustainable relationships, not temporary relationships within our community, we will receive the grace that's necessary when something controversial happens. When something controversial happens, it is a storm. And rather, it is determined that what we did was justifiable or not. The perspectives are going to be different within the community, that what we did, whether it was justified, whether it was adequate or appropriate, it does not matter. It still means that someone's loved one was either hurt or killed. So we start working on that before we ever start worrying about when it's going to happen. So our primary job and our role is to engage our community, because we can't have community members who participate and who are key stakeholders with us if we don't engage them. And it doesn't mean only the people who are easy to speak with, but also those who are advocates and activists for the police department as well. We have to have a communication aspect before we can get anything done. And that is probably the most important thing I would say as a leader, is to ensure that we have that avenue and we're reaching all segments of the community. And that's door to door. That's not just driving by, patrolling in a car. That's getting out of the car and making sure you know who lives in the area and works in the area where you're geographically assigned. So it's a big piece, and everything focuses on relationships. Everything starts with the relationship. You can't even build trust if you don't have a relationship. So very important for the officers to understand what the organizational culture is, what my expectations of them should be and what their expectations of me should be, because it starts with the leader.
Thank you. Third question, please discuss your approach to ensuring that there is a culture of accountability to the community and between officers.
Accountability is very important, but a police organization is complex. So accountability, it should be at every level, and it should be in all forms of what we do. It should start from top up, from the bottom up, and then from the top down. When you don't allow small things to slide and to be ignored, it doesn't turn into larger things. So a lot of times in policing, we see across the country things that come that someone has recorded, and it becomes viral and everyone sees it. Well, as a leader, we know that several things have happened prior to that, but they have been ignored, usually, is how it works. And that can come from different ranks in different areas, or it can come from friendships, popularity, allegiances or alliances to someone. But when you talk about the role that we play and the authority that we have in our positions, it's incumbent upon us to ensure we're putting the right people in the right positions. So our lowest level supervisors, very important to what's being done on the street, because they're the first ones that can see when accountability is necessary, when something is being done that is out of line or is unacceptable with what our organizational culture is, or policies or procedures. So it's incumbent upon us to work together. You don't want situations to continue to occur where it rises up to the occasion of a chief of police. It comes all the way to the top. The best situation and the best magnitude for performance measures is for it to be handled at the lowest level within your supervisory chain. Sometimes it doesn't happen. So when it doesn't happen and it goes to internal affairs and that packet comes to the leader, decisions have to be made, and we have to pay a particular attention to what happened and what was the outcome. Not who the employee is, who they're friends with. All of that stuff is irrelevant. We need to look at the act, and then what was the outcome of what happened, and then make sure that we are consistent with how we treat them across the board with all the other employees in the organization. Because if we have inconsistency, then that breeds issues with organizational culture as well. So accountability, transparency, leadership, all of that aligns with one another. And if one is off, it can definitely negatively impact the other.
Thank you. Fourth question. So, acknowledging that all police agencies engage in training, we've still seen instances of unjustified force across the country. Please discuss your views on de-escalation training or other measures to prevent out-of-policy use of force.
De-escalation is very important. As the chief of police in Nevada, one of the things that I implemented while I was the leader there was a separate and standalone de-escalation policy. Where I am now in Sacramento, de-escalation is a part of another policy, so it's combined. I felt it necessary in 2017 to separate it out, to make sure that our officers understand the significance of it. But not only do you need de-escalation training, you also need to encompass that with communication and interpersonal skills training, because we can stop a lot of force being utilized just from what comes out of our mouth. Usually when an officer comes to the scene, you either escalate a situation by how you act and your attitude and your demeanor when you arrive on the scene, or you actually resolve the issue just from how you treat someone. Because regardless of where they live, how much money they have, or what type of job they have, they should be treated with humility and respect. Where the problem comes in is when we show up and we have a chip on our shoulder, or we're having a bad day, or something is wrong, and we provide attitude. And a lot of times I see that in the leadership role that I'm in, and that's one of the things that we're working on in Sacramento is organizational culture. Because when you pay attention and you have officers on different sides of town and different divisions acting the same way, that leads you to understand that that's a part of their culture, that community relations is not what it needs to be, but also the focus in the academy is not on the mindset of being community driven. And that's one of the things that in the police academy, and when your training first starts, there should be a heavy reliance on how you interact with individuals, how you use your interpersonal skills and your communication skills to provide a resolution for whatever crisis you're facing when they call you. Because 9 times out of 10, we arrive at locations when people are in the midst of a crisis. That's the only reason they're calling the police. Many don't want to, and some of them have not. Their neighbors or someone else that saw it or heard something. So the biggest thing to understand is that our culture is what's going to dictate what our acceptable and unacceptable behaviors are when we go out of the police station and out into doing our jobs on a daily basis. So not only do we worry about that, but we also worry about making sure we have problem solvers in the uniform. Because most of the things that we do as police officers is not enforcement. It's usually some sort of societal ill that we're not in control of, but we're called to ask, what should we do? And so arriving on the scene, we need people who are thinkers to figure out what resources are necessary in order to help whoever we're dealing with, whatever the issue is at that particular time. So training is one thing, but without the proper policies, procedures, the training is non-existent, and without the necessary supervision to follow through and make sure that we're doing what we learn, it means nothing. So training is important, policies are important, but then also making sure that we are doing what we're doing and we have follow through is just as important, equally important to ensure that we're effective in actually providing protection and service, and not, I would say, the warrior mindset. Warrior mindset, you come in, you get facts, and you leave. Guardian mindset is you come in, you obtain information, and you all work together to come up with a resolution so that you can turn that crisis into much less than what it was when you first arrived there. And it's usually a great deal of different avenues that you have to go through in order to determine what they need. And usually it's not from the police, it's from some other social service agency that they need help from.
Thank you. What experience do you have working in What experience do you have working and interacting with members of the LGBTQ+ community? And how would you make these community members feel safe and comfortable in their interactions with police?
A great deal of interaction working with the LGBT community In Texas, that's where the majority of my law enforcement experience is. In Arlington, Texas, the population is approximately about 415,000 outside of the two major stadiums that's in the city. And then also in the city of Nevada, the population in Henderson was 350,000. And now in Sacramento, which is a capital city, it's the largest city that I've been employed at, about 570,000. So one of the things that the Police Commission and my office, which is the Office of Public Safety Accountability, has worked with the police department on is a separate policy for the LGBT community. But the main thing when you talk about policing is to understand and to have that culture that knows that regardless of what your race, what your gender, what your sexual orientation is, what your ethnicity is, you should be treated with humility and respect. And we have to get back to that in policing. Paying attention or worrying about what your choices are is not important. It is important for us to provide the best quality of life for every resident in the city, regardless of socioeconomic status and things like that. So again, it falls back to who we hire, who we bring into the organization, and those that we allow the opportunity to be a police officer. We ensure that there are avenues in place if they have unacceptable behaviors, that there are consequences for those so that we don't allow other organizational members to think it's okay to do the same thing. So we've tried through these. We have some very rigid hiring practices in law enforcement. They go through all types of things in order to try to become a police officer. A lot of the processes that we've put in place, we've tried to weed out people that are just not fit to have that level of authority and take people's civil liberties away. But people do get past that. They do. And that's why it's incumbent upon you have to have very, very strict policies, procedures, and disciplinary action should they violate those policies.
Thank you. Could you please discuss steps that you have taken during your career to counter the effects of implicit bias?
Yes, from an executive standpoint, I have participated in implicit bias, fair and impartial policing, procedural justice, cultural awareness, you name it. I've participated in that training. Coming up through the ranks in Arlington Police Department, I've attended the train the trainer as well, because what our job was is to attend it, to see if we found value in what it was that this company was bringing into the organization. And then it was incumbent upon us to pick out informal leaders within the organization so that we didn't continue to have to bring them back to Texas, and that we had officers and really informal leaders within the organization to provide the training to our cadre that we had and any incoming officers that we had. One of the most important things that we found out is because we always have implicit biases, that one-time training is not enough. Ongoing, continued training is very necessary because when we go through life, that's not something we focus on. So it's a lot of implicit biases that I have and that everyone has that we're just not aware of. So it's something that we wanted to put in place on a continuous level, but also encompassing that with procedural justice is very important too, because fair and impartial policing, procedural justice, implicit bias, all of them offer a level and some differences that are very, very important to how we interact with other people that we are different from. So as a leader, coming into an organization that required a lot of reform, some of those contacts I brought to the state of Nevada, and we did the same process, speaking with all of our different levels and ranking supervisors to figure out who throughout non-sworn and sworn in the Henderson Police Department that we need to have trained and know how to train other officers and other staff on implicit bias and procedural justice as well. And also, they hadn't had cultural awareness training. And when you talk about different ethnicities, depending on how much information or how less exposure you've had, that can dictate offensive or defensive behavior when you're interacting with someone as well. So all of those are very important in Henderson as well, because it was a first for them. But one of the things that we built in for performance measures is to make sure that during their annual performance evaluations, that speaks to how they've been interacting with each other, as well as how they've been interacting with the public, to determine whether or not they warrant raises, and also those who are seeking promotion. Community involvement is very important when you're looking at picking the next leaders of the organization as well. So I utilize their performance measures to determine whether or not promotion to the next level was something that was fit for them. Because putting the wrong person in a leadership role can also have negative impact in the organization as well.
Thank you. So the role of chief requires that you communicate with police employees, elected officials, the public, and other agencies. Please discuss your style of doing so, touching upon steps you've taken to improve skills.
Sure. I've had the opportunity to grow in an organization from recruit officer up to deputy chief of police, but then I've also had the opportunity to be what you call an outsider, coming into an organization where organizational members are not familiar with you. The only thing they know is what they've read. So doing that brings a different level of unfamiliarity. Instead of watching you promote up through the ranks within one organization, they've only seen you at that executive level. So when you speak about coming in and getting to know others is very important. It's very hard to get things done when you haven't established that long-term relationship and you haven't started to build that trust. And just as though I have expectations of my team members, well, of course, they should have expectations of me. So I would say the first 90 to 120 days, very incumbent to listen. You're going to make sure that you get in front of your entire organization. Now, it took almost, I would say, 145 days in the state of Nevada. I had almost 700 employees when I arrived in that city. I not only had the sworn police side, but I also managed a 540-bed space detention facility that housed federally contracted prisoners as well. So I had the rank of officer to captain on the correction side, and then I had officer to captain and then deputy chiefs on the police side. So getting in front of those employees, and the first round was introductory meetings where I talked about what I brought to the table, what my leadership philosophy was, what my expectations of them was, and just giving them a one-on-one face-to-face with who I am. The second round of meetings was with individual units, individual work groups, because just because we call it the same thing, the gang unit, the homicide unit, every police department still does not function and operate the same. So giving those groups an opportunity to talk to me about what they do, so we can get a good in-depth understanding of where we are right now versus where we need to go. So the same way I met with sworn, I had to meet with professional staff employees because they have a different set of challenges than sworn employees have, and they add value to the organizations as well. One of the issues that I had coming into the organization, the city manager had a very great divide between patrol and corrections, where they didn't get along, and then professional staff felt disrespected by my sworn staff. So that was one of the charges I was given, is to figure out what the root causes of that was and to develop a strategy to get away from that, because we all need to be working together. And one of the things that I talk a lot about in police organizations is professional staff add value to our organization, and they do things either we do not want to do or we cannot do. So we will not be disrespectful to anyone, rather they're non-sworn or sworn. So again, very, very busy meeting with internal members, but then also busy in the evening time meeting with all of our stakeholders as well. So those first 120 to 160 days, very, 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 very busy, but very important because you have a lot of members who are very proud of the cities that they're in, and they have a great deal of information that's going to be very important to effectiveness for me as a leader. So a lot more listening than talking. Listening to our organizational members about what's been working, what hasn't. You don't want to come in and change things that don't need to be changed. That's a waste of time. And reinventing the wheel is not necessary. But you do want to find out where we're weak at and where we need to become more strong. And so all of that information gained, that allows me as a leader to lead a strategic process. You want to have organizational members and community involved because that's where buy-in comes in, ownership, responsibility. When they talk about what it is that we need to do, that creates ownership, not just for me, but for them as well. And then they are very dedicated and invested in where we go from now. You don't bring in a leader who comes in with a set plan. We're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because there is no buy-in from the organizational members, and a leader cannot make change on their own. They have to have a team aspect where everyone's working together and we all understand what the vision is. And the vision can't just be created by the police department. The community values have to be a part of our vision because that's why we exist. We exist for the community. So it takes a lot to make sure that everyone has a voice. But in the long run, it's very valuable because you get a lot of engagement from your educational institutions in your city, your multi-dwelling family institutions, meaning that you want not just you, but all levels of your organization to meet with your apartment complex managers. They should know who they are, even if they overturn them quite a bit. In Texas, they did quite a bit. But your faith-based stakeholders, your business stakeholders, not only should the chief and the command staff be very aware of who those are, but every level of your organization should know, because that's true community policing. Community policing is not just one unit of officers understanding what it is that the community wants and needs. It's our entire organization understanding that, and all of us working with them. It should not be just me. It should be all of us. And I should know who our leaders are and who we should talk to when in a time of crisis, but every rank and every level within our organization should also know who we're communicating with and providing them as much information as we legally can at the time that the incident happens. And then as more information is developed, providing those updates. And so what we call that is a crisis response plan. And that has all of your stakeholders and who we talk to and who we deal with on a daily basis. So it's a lot of work, I would say. But once you come in and you get everything together from the beginning and you develop those relationships, it'll come with ease as things happen that you quite naturally will have different and varying perspectives on, was it done right or was it done wrong? And should we determine that we did something wrong? It's incumbent upon me as the leader and my entire staff to acknowledge that publicly. This is not what we should have done. We should have done A, B, C, D, and E, and then here's what we're going to do to mitigate that from reoccurring again. We cannot hide when we do something wrong. We're people, and so we're not perfect. So if we do respond to something and we did not do what we were supposed to do, the public has a right to know that. And then they have a right to know how we are all going to work together and to make sure that if it should happen again, that we follow through and we meet the community's expectations of how they feel like we should police them.
Thank you. Our 8th question, can you please cite an example of where you've helped your agency to coalesce around a change of policy, protocols, or programs when their initial reaction was to resist the change?
Sure. I have a lot of experience with resistance and change. I'll use an example as chief of police in the state of Nevada. I came to an organization where when you look at the website and when they were calling me, I turned the position down 5 times before I actually accepted. But they talked about community-oriented policing. All of my experience comes from Arlington, and we're an internationally recognized organization and a community policing leader. When we talked about the President Task Force on 21st Century Policing a little earlier, when you mentioned that, that has 15 implementation agencies that are the example for what police should be in this country. Arlington is one of those 15 agencies. I mean, it's all based on our philosophy and what we do within the organization. So going to Henderson, because they told me that that's what they do, I believe that they did. Getting there and figuring out in the history of their department, they had not ever once had a community or neighborhood watch group ever, was very, very troubling and concerning. Listening to the community stakeholders in my first 120 days, discussing the response times and how we're not meeting their expectations, as well as just driving around and patrolling. No one getting out of the car, no one knowing who the officers are that work their areas, what shifts they work. So we had some work to do because community policing is not that. And I had a lot of officers who thought that, community policing belonged to the community policing unit and that they didn't have any responsibility in community policing. So the first thing that I had to do was educate my entire organization on what community policing was. So I developed a training for community policing for every level and every rank within the organization. I mean, that took some time because myself and my deputy chief that I brought from Arlington with me to the organization had to personally do the training because we didn't have anyone who understood what community policing was. But that was the start of something great. Because once I implemented a blended model of geographic-based policing and community policing together in an organization, and it's still implemented to this day. And one of the things that I say that was probably the most impactful was the letters, the calls, the visits to city council meetings from community members saying that they've lived in Henderson for 20-plus years, and they pointed that since that chief has arrived, this is the first time I've seen this many officers in our neighborhood and out of their cars, not to write a ticket, not to make any enforcement action, but to introduce themselves and let us know that they work this area on this shift at this different times. When you implement community policing and true community policing, how you measure is that they officers and sergeants also have to come into accountability meetings, and they do, we call them SARA projects, and they are normally related to enforcement actions that they are handling within their geographic areas or quality of life issues, because depending on where you're geographically assigned, you may not have neighborhoods, you may have a business, all business offices. It's just depending on where you're assigned at for a 2-year period. That way you keep consistency. So officers bid every 2 years, and they get to pick what side of town. I had 3 different police stations in the city of Henderson. So a lot of my informal leaders did not want to do projects. They did not want to talk about in an accountability meeting what they were doing in their area. To note, though, is that our first meeting where a veteran sergeant who had been a sergeant in Henderson 21 years and 2 beat officers came and had to do a presentation about a quality of life issue that they were working on. And to have that sergeant to stand up and say, Chief, I was one of the few supervisors who wanted to participate in geographic-based policing when you implemented that. I want to tell you that I was wrong, and that I learned so much working with the managers in Target. And so I'll give you some background. This particular officer and this particular sergeant were assigned a business suite area. And within this area was a grocery store, a Target, a beauty salon, and 3 other businesses within the area. When he was doing some research, he found on Yelp that he had community members that said that they bypassed that business suite and drove across town to other Targets and grocery stores because it didn't look safe. The lights was out. A lot of issues were within that area. So in community policing, we do a lot of collaboration with other city departments, and so he brought along other city departments to come take a look at that area and see how they can improve it because of the low rankings that the area received and Target manager said they were losing in excess of $680,000 in retail theft from their location. And the grocery store wasn't that high, but it was pretty high. So with the partnership and them bringing in all of the business suite owners and the people that rented the leases, they actually came to the presentation and they talked about how they decreased their retail theft by more than $480,000 from the partnership of working directly with their beat officers and not having to call 911 every time someone shoplifted. So just him talking about how he didn't believe that the blended model was necessary in their city, and him coming back and other officers who actually followed behind him because he was a true and former leader, discussing how important it was to have that connectivity that they had once not had was very important because that equivalated to buy-in from our organizational members. So it wasn't just me and my command staff talking about how important true community policing is, but they were able to see it and develop it themselves and build those relationships. And as the other officers had to come through and do their presentations, it was not that resistant attitude or the demeanor that I'm here to do this, but I really don't feel like doing it. It was more of excitement and them ready to share with us how they positively impacted the areas that they actually work in. So that's probably one of the biggest things that I would say throughout my career that I was proud of is implementing true community policing and geographic-based policing from the ground up in an organization and a population of about 345,000 people.
Thank you. Please share your experience or philosophy around the use of police data in helping your pardon me, I'll start over. Please share your experience or philosophy around the use of police data in helping your department be more transparent. Do you see any limitations in using data to solve problems?
That's a good question. The use of data is very important to police organizations because it can have us respond to concerns in a more informed way. So I come from an organization that's very data-driven in Arlington. Going to an organization as their leader and not, I was a deputy chief of police in Arlington. Data was very important to look at because when you're coming into an organization, what you want to do is find out what the root causes of the issues are. And so even though I went to a smaller city with less crime, one victim is still too many. So it's incumbent upon me to figure out where the crimes are and why they are occurring. So data was very important. Property crimes was what I found that led the crime trends in the city of Henderson. Violent crime was what I dealt with a lot with in Arlington, and trying to mitigate violent crime because we were a tourist city. So you have so many people coming to the city for Dallas Cowboy games, Texas Ranger games, and all things of that nature. We want to make sure that they're not being victimized when they're in our city. Not a good thing. So looking at crime data is very important, but then also matching that with what are we doing about what has been happening is very important. Our old CompStat processes in policing, we've transitioned those in many of our progressive agencies. So what we want to do is we want to look at we bring in our crime analysis unit to put up all of the crimes that we have experienced, whether they're property or violent, across the city. We look at that on a weekly, a bi-weekly, and a monthly basis. But what I found as a leader is overlaying the crime with where we are lacking in community engagement is very important to look at too. So not only looking at crime assists us with effectiveness, but looking at our community engagement levels. Because what you'll usually find is where we are very heavy at with crime, we are very weak at with engaging the community and finding out what's going on in those areas. So looking at that and making sure our staff looks at that and modify what our operations are very important. One of the things that was very new that I brought to the city was also overlaying all that information with hiring, recruitment, marketing, and retention. So also looking at that. One of the issues that we had was we lacked diversity in the city. So the first time that the organization had been exposed to any minority women as police was me coming in as the head of the organization, which is not good. So one of the things the city manager wanted me to work on was diversity and inclusion. So the key to figuring out where we're going wrong at is to looking at who's putting in an application and every step of the process where we're losing our diverse candidates at. The only way you can change that is to figure out what we're doing wrong. I lacked having women in the organization. Had to find out why. And so one of the things we implemented was voluntary and optional and free boot camp training with our personnel and recruiting unit and some of our other officers that had already been in the organization for a while. If you are interested in putting in, you'll know what the physical agility is prior to you ever having to take the physical agility test. And then you're working out in order so you already have ran through and understood what it is that you need and what times you need in order to pass, instead of taking it for the first time and then being eliminated from the process from the very beginning. So that was able to increase my numbers as well. But one of the key focuses that I found out is that number-wise, I could easily get the numbers of women, minorities. But if we don't have inclusion and they're not comfortable and we're not welcoming them into the organization, the numbers will come and then the numbers will go. So working on organizational culture was very important in Henderson. Just because they look different, they come from a different background or a different ethnicity, don't mean that we treat them in a different manner, because they're bringing something to the table that no one else has, and that gives us a 360-degree view when we all are different. Everyone, just like me, is not going to make us go into the next century with the best practices. We need people with different ideas, different thoughts, and they need to be comfortable talking and giving their ideas is very important too. So those were one of the key things. So not only looking at crime, but looking at community engagement, where we need to improve in that, and then also who we're hiring, and then why we're not hiring, what we need to hire in the organization was very important too, coming in as a new chief there.
Thank you. And our final question, and there might be follow-ups afterwards, depending. So how would you ensure the mental well-being of your officers? And please share an example where you collaborated with outside agencies on mental health issues affecting the community.
Yes, that's a very, very good question. Mental health is very important. It's even gotten more important since COVID. COVID seemed to create another level of issues. And one of the things we found is that if you had a solid program for your officers' wellness, that you didn't experience a lot of call-outs during this particular time. If your programs were not utilized much by officers, meaning your wellness programs, then it really negatively impacted your staffing during COVID. And so as a leader, one of the most important things, just like we look at crime and community engagement and all those things, making sure our officers are as healthy as we can have them is very important, because how they feel directly impacts how they act when they're interacting with our community. So one of the things that I implemented and that we developed from the ground up, we called it Lifeline in the city of Henderson. And that was an anonymous app that officers could utilize, because pride is something that we have. I've been an officer almost 30 years, and pride gets in the way, and ego a lot with police. And so we wanted to make sure that there were resources available where it wasn't known that you were utilizing them, especially when you're talking about relationship issues. I had a lot of officers in Nevada that experienced issues in their marriage. Don't want to tell anyone, but you can tell something's going on because they're not acting right when they come to work, and especially men. Okay, I hate to say it. My dad always laughs when I say something about men, but it is very obvious when they've had an argument, a bad whatever's going on, it shows on them, and they don't like to open up and talk to supervisors in the organization. So having the outside counselors available on Lifeline, where you can read about what their experiences are and what their expertise is, and they can pick and it comes through the program for the organization where it's paid for, was very important. And we didn't get to know exactly who was using it, but we got to see how often it was being used to make sure that it was something beneficial. We had places where our staff could put in anonymous information and cards about what they liked about Lifeline and the app, what they didn't like about it, how we could improve it, because we want to modify it to the point where it's being used. And being anonymous was one of the things that we had increases in usage of the services because many of them want to keep their business private. And as I told my staff, when you're talking about counseling, relationship counseling, stress, anxiety, depression, things like that, the only time the requirement was we had to be notified was when we were talking about suicidal officers. Very important that that's one thing that we could not allow that to be anonymous, because we needed to get them help. And the good thing about it is I found throughout my tenure there that it did work, because one of the officers that was suicidal, it came to my attention, and we had to send someone out, and we had to get that officer some help, and that meant going to a mental institution for a mandatory evaluation. So very in-depth experience in making sure that we're putting something in place that we will actually have officers use. A lot of things that throughout my career that I didn't even use when I was a street cop, we've always had wellness programs in place, but we need them to be used so that it can actually help them, and that helps them perform their job better, actually. And so how we treat our organizational members within the organization, as I always say, it should transcend on how we treat people outside of our organization. So we have to internally make sure that we have the culture that we have, that we need, and that meets the expectations and the values of the community in order for it to transcend, so that when we do interact with you, we are interacting how we should be interacting, not how we choose to on a given day. And that's a very, very important aspect for policing, because how they treat each other and the bickering inside the organization, if we don't get a check on that, it will just transcend, and it will be the same thing as how they treat the community members with disrespect outside the organization.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there follow-ups? Councilmember Cornell.
Thank you for being here this morning and spending time with us.
I should note we have about 2 minutes.
My question is around your response regarding data use. So you gave the example around increasing diversity and whatnot within the force, but I'm interested to hear what data do you feel is most important for the community externally to understand, and how would you use that to inform the community engagement activities that you spoke about at length?
Yes. The most important thing is to know is that we cannot have an engaged community without them being informed. So when we talk about sharing data from the police organization, it's not just crime data, it's all data. So different community members must be communicated with in a different way. So our communication strategy has to be robust, because all of our community members don't use phones to that magnitude. I know my father, he still wanted a flip phone, and that was just, that was old school. He didn't use a computer very much, so a lot of the things that we push out online, some residents will see it and some will not. So we have to have a multifaceted approach when you talk about data. We're needing to send out hard copy information. We're needing to make sure that our website has a lot of information about what we're utilizing data for. We need to share our maps that show where we're heavily engaged with the community, where we're lacking, and where we're going to be focused on each month to make sure we establish those relationships. Town hall meetings, neighborhood watch meetings, business coalition meetings. We have to make sure that we're sharing the same information at the same magnitude in all of the different aspects. Very hard thing to do, but once you get rolling, it becomes normal. It becomes something that the entire organization is used to. So it can't just be us asking the community to come to a town hall meeting at the police station. It's us going to community meetings that they're holding and that they want to know about what it is that we're working on, and we're sharing what that is. So also, it's not just about what we're working on as well. When we start looking at equipment and things that we want to utilize in our daily functions, that information needs to go to the community as well, because they should have input on things before we do it.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have.
Okay, okay.
Thank you so
I
much for-
appreciate you all's time.
You as
and
well.
attention.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
And welcome to Ann Arbor.
Thank you all. You have a good day.
Oh, we're adjourned for 10. Commander Hassig.
Thank you.
Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you all for having me. My name is Christopher Hassig, Commander of Police with the Houston Police Department. Thank you.
Excellent. And so, as you've probably been briefed, we have 50 minutes together. I'll roll through a set of questions. You'll provide the answers you'd be delighted to provide, and then if there are follow-ups, we'll come up with those after the set of first questions, after the set of questions in its entirety.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much. So, question number one. How have the principles from the 21st Century Policing Report impacted your leadership approach, especially in light of disproportionate harms suffered by people of color?
Well, thank you all for allowing me to be here. And I definitely take the President's 21st Century Policing overview to heart. It's a great, an important document put together by great minds, throughout our country, the law enforcement field, and others that care about our society, those that have been unfortunately affected and harmed by past policing issues. I understand that. We can't move forward without recognizing and accepting the past, but taking those 6 pillars, making sure that we ingrain into our young officers that guardian mindset, moving away from being, we are not warriors. I'm a firm believer of that. Embracing that we are there to work for the community and work with the community. We're not trying to impress anything onto them. We're there to serve. I'm a big proponent of servant leadership. I want to make sure that I provide everything to my officers and that we in turn provide the services needed for the community. I think that we need to embrace technology. In the 21st century, there's a lot available to us. Now, we don't just do so on the fly. I think that, doing our due diligence, just like any other business, organization, you need to take a watchful eye. You look at past practices, you look at other cities that may have implemented items, and you take that into consideration, and then you take that into consideration for the population that you're serving. I'm huge on officer wellness, making sure, if you have dissatisfied officers, you're not going to provide that level of service needed in the community. You need to make sure that the officers feel appreciated, that they are commended for jobs well done when they do that. Because I firmly believe and love the work that I do, and I think that the overwhelming majority of officers do the right thing most of the time. And when we fall short, for our sake and the community's sake, we need to hold them accountable. That said, we need to make sure that there are processes in place to make sure that officers are taken care of, that we worry about officers' mental health, their physical health, and that we are able to move forward and provide the best service possible for, in this instance, Ann Arbor, but the nation in general.
Thank you. Could you please discuss your approach to ensuring transparency, especially during high-profile incidents, including the role the chief should play in communicating to the community?
The chief, in any sort of situation like that, has the utmost important role in getting out there, being the face of the department. That is the chief's responsibility. That said, I'm not sure what Ann Arbor's practice is now, but in any sort of critical incident, I know something that we've implemented in the city of Houston and something that I would look forward to bringing here if that's the case. But any time where a situation devolves, heaven forbid that there's an officer-involved shooting, another critical incident, something major where an injury took place, there's a death in custody, something severe that would bring media attention, where officers would need to be held accountable. We need to release the body-worn camera footage within 30 days. We need to provide that critical incident footage to the public, and the chief needs to step forward and do so. I'm big on transparency. Transparency is, one of the tenets, one of the things that I learned from past mentors and predecessors in the Houston Police Department. I'm big at my level, being over the Southwest Command of the Houston Police Department. We hold monthly meetings at our station. We invite any community member that wants to come. We go over statistics, major events that occurred within the last 30 days. I answer any and all questions, whether it's in front of the entire forum or whether they want to speak to me one-on-one afterwards. I make myself rather accessible, and I would do the same here in Ann Arbor. I do think that Ann Arbor does a great job with the transparency dashboard as it is now. That's an excellent step, and we would look to flesh that out if necessary and see what else that we can provide to the community so that we work together hand in hand.
Thanks. Can you please discuss your approach to ensuring that there is a culture of accountability to the community and between officers?
Accountability is it's a major part in what I believe, and I follow. It's an offshoot of community policing. We've coined it, or others before me have coined it as relational policing. So I know, looking at the transparency dashboard, that on average, if I'm not mistaken, Ann Arbor averages about 4,500 to 5,000 calls for service from their police department a month. Those are 4,500 to 5,000 opportunities to build relationships. At the very core of police work are the relationships one-on-one when somebody calls us in need of assistance. The unfortunate truth is that most people do not call us or need us on their best days. And so we need to go there and be compassionate. We need to be professional, and we need to give them what they need. That being said, accountability is key. They need to know that as a commander, as a chief, that I would ensure we follow policies and procedures, that we open investigations, whether there's a complaint brought in externally from a citizen that has an issue, or we spot something internally, whether administrative or something that we perhaps caught on a body-worn camera. We would start the complaint. We would notify the citizen that is involved, keep them abreast of the situation, provide that documentation, let them know that we take their concerns seriously and that we have investigated fully. I would work unabashedly with ICPOC, knowing that they are a major part of this city. They have a major role in holding the police department accountable, and that we build that relationship. I know that the mission of ICPOC is to help mend and create a fruitful relationship between the citizens and the police department. So I accept that and would make sure to be as transparent as possible with the accountability process.
Thanks. So acknowledging that all police agencies engage in training, yet we've still seen several instances of unjustified use of force throughout the country. Please discuss your views on de-escalation training or other measures to prevent out-of-policy use of force.
You are correct that there are unfortunate situations of unjustified use of force, and those need to be handled, and hopefully in more cases now, and hopefully all cases from this point forward, those cases are handled appropriately, that criminal charges, when called for, are issued, because we are, the police are the people and the people are the police. It's an old adage, but it's true. And so when officers go beyond the badge and act inappropriately, then they need to be held accountable. I think training needs to be robust. It needs to be continual. I don't know how many hours of training are done at the state level when one becomes a police officer, but you can't just rest on your laurels with what you're taught at the very beginning. You know, we're fortunate in the Houston Police Department, we have a minimum standard of 32, sometimes 40 hours of continuing education a year. But that's, like I said, bare bones, the minimum. So I would make sure that de-escalation, crisis intervention training, mental health awareness, learning about issues, current topics on homelessness are all regularly taught. You need to have the skills for those high-risk situations, those high-risk, high-frequency situations. You need to train, unfortunately, in today's society for those low-frequency, high-risk situations. What we've seen here in Michigan and Oxford and other school shootings nationwide, for instance, we need to be prepared for that as a department. That's our responsibility. But the majority of training needs to be understanding de-escalation, crisis intervention, learning cultural topics, because the majority of our interactions with the public are rather benign compared to those, like I said, those high-risk situations.
Thank you. So, what experience do you have working and interacting with members of the LGBTQ+ community? And how would you make these community members feel safe and comfortable in their interactions with police?
I've been fortunate so far in my almost 17-year career with the Houston Police Department to work in one of the most diverse cities in the country, and that includes a rather large LGBTQIA+ population. We host one of the largest pride parades on a yearly basis. We embrace that completely with open arms as a department, walking in it side by side, helping staff protect individuals' rights to walk, be proud, be present, and walk the streets of Houston. I also am fortunate enough to work with many members of that community, and hopefully, and I believe, make them feel included, welcomed within our organization. And we would take those steps, I would, as chief and as a department, to make sure that we receive regular training on different issues, topics to those different communities, as well as make sure that we are present for any community events. We're not going to turn anybody away to be there and be a representative of the Ann Arbor Police Department, and we'll be there to support them and be proud to do so.
Thank you. Can you please discuss steps that you have taken during your career to counter the effects of implicit bias? So
what we have done in the Houston Police Department, so we have implemented regular training on implicit bias. We're making sure that that's something that is, it's a study and area of concentration that it's something that we work on a yearly basis. We just went through some mandatory implicit bias training, 8 hours. I would make sure that as chief, we would have that, whether on a biannual basis or more if necessary. But we need to go and make sure that we're looking statistically, whether I know the recent study done with the Ann Arbor Police Department on traffic stops done by Eastern Michigan. But we need to work with our partners in academia to address any biases, whether implicit or hopefully not explicit, but handle those on a training basis and an accountability basis if necessary.
Thank you. So the role of chief requires that you communicate with police employees, with elected officials, with the public, and other city agencies. Please discuss your style of doing so, touching upon steps you've taken to improve your skills.
I've been very fortunate in my role as commander of police with the Southwest Command in the Houston Police Department to work side by side with elected officials. We have 3 different districts that we overlap. I work with those city council members and their staff to address, criminal issues, quality of life issues, and we have a very positive working relationship. They have my phone number, they have my email address. We talk off hours when necessary, and we make sure that we work collaboratively to get the job done. I'm big on a collaborative mindset and collaborative leadership. Unfortunately, there are times as a chief of police or working as a police, working in law enforcement, where a command decision needs to be made immediately. There are some unfortunate events that have occurred in society that require us to make that decision. Other times, though, most of the decisions can be done taking a step back, formulating a plan, and inviting people to the table. I'm big on collaborating with community members, city council, anybody to that fact, frontline officers and other personnel. When we need to come up with a decision for a police department, for a command, we're all going to sit, we're going to discuss, and we're going to come up with the best possible solution together.
Thank you. So can you please cite an example where you've helped your agency coalesce around a change of policy, protocols, or programs when the initial reaction was to resist the change?
So we've had many changes in policy. The last few years we've seen with the death of George Floyd and others, the increased call, and rightfully so, for accountability. We have implemented many changes, for instance, with the Houston Police Department, added steps to ensure that when criminal charges are filed with the district attorney's office and the county, to make sure that all the ducks are in a row. Officers need to file, perjury statements, make sure that it's something new to them. There's additional steps to go through to ensure that officers attest under oath that their charges that are filed are proper and true. There's some initial feedback, and I would say kickback at first, just because the officers, they said it took too long. They didn't understand why they were not trusted. They wanted to know why they couldn't file those charges and move along. They had work to do. It took me as commander to address each and every roll call, whether that involved me going to different shifts, making myself readily available, not just having officers come to me, but I'm big on going to my officers where they're at and addressing their concerns, listening. I think it's important to be an active listener as a leader, taking their feedback, being empathetic, understanding or trying to understand where they're coming from, but at the end of the day, knowing the greater good and what is necessary from an accountability aspect for the community and the department to be in a better place. So yes, while that added time and extra responsibility to the officer's workday when they placed somebody in custody, there were more forms and other hoops, as they put it, to jump through. You have to step forward as a leader, go out to your officers, go out to the community, listen, and let them know, these are the policies, this is why they're in place. and this is how we're going to move forward.
Thank you. Can you please share your experience or your philosophy around the use of police data in helping your department be more transparent? Do you see any limitations in using data to solve problems?
So I definitely believe that as a department or as a law enforcement in general, we're moving from one era of policing to the next. You know, anybody that's studied criminal justice knows, we went through a political era, we had a reform era, community era, which started around 1980. And many would still say that we are in this community policing area post-1980. I'm of the belief, though, that while community policing is an absolute necessity, problem solving and working with the community, we're transitioning to an era where it's community policing enveloped in evidence-based practices. And I think a lot of that is looking at the data and statistics and best deploying our resources when looking at violent crime to tackle those issues. So I know that other cities have had great success. We talk about our partners up north from Houston, Dallas. They've worked side by side with scholars from the University of Texas at San Antonio in doing a great job of building a grid work. In Dallas, they use a 330 foot by 330 foot grid, and they've mapped out their entire city. They look at the crime that's occurred, they look at the time of day, and they best deploy their resources at that point to tackle what the data shows them. Now, they're not just going out there and what we call saturating the area. They're not going out there and just arresting anybody and writing tickets and all that good stuff. That's the old method of policing. What they're doing, though, is they are being present, and they're in their cars, in those grids, if you will. They are maybe turning on their floodlights. They're putting themselves in high visibility areas. They're maybe walking around an apartment complex or walking around some strip centers, and they're making themselves be known. So, something akin to that and what could work here in Ann Arbor, maybe something similar is already in place, but looking at that data, looking at the statistics, and making sure that we're increasing our foot patrol downtown. Maybe we're riding around on bikes at a particular time where we haven't before, or doing more so. We're deploying ATVs. In our Southwest Command, we have an extensive network of bayous and waterways, nature paths. So we utilize ATVs to go out there, make sure that those walking around feel safe, that they know that we're out there to help them, and we're there for them. So I definitely am a proponent of using data, being transparent, making sure that our statistics are out there for the public. We have nothing to hide. We are a part of the community, and they should be aware of the work that we're doing.
Thank you. Thank you. And how would you ensure the mental well-being of your officers? And please share an example where you collaborated with outside agencies on mental health issues affecting the community.
When it comes to mental health and officers, we have a multi-pronged approach in Houston, and something that I've embraced personally and unfortunately have had to utilize, not myself, but for officers that are under my command. So we have a psychological services division. I understand that's not something that is here, but we have accessible counselors or psychiatrists if necessary, through an employee assistance program, making sure that officers are aware of what mental health resources we have for them. We instituted what's called the Houston Officers Peer Assistance Program, completely anonymous, in collaboration with our union, where we have retired officers or community members that are trained. They get together, continuing education, and they can answer the phone. They take turns, they take shifts, and officers are able to reach out to this phone number 24/7, and they'll speak with somebody, a peer, and discuss issues, and they can also lead them in the right direction for those resources. We have peer support within the department itself. Peer support is a great help. They come out to roll calls on a regular basis, let officers know of what they can provide. And then at the end of the day, it's really incumbent upon the leadership of the station to make sure that officers feel appreciated and that we're doing the best job that we can to watch our officers and make sure that their mental health and their morale is as high as possible. So, whether we're conducting after-action reports after a significant event, letting them digest what just took place, making sure that morale is high, that they're properly commended, that they know that they're appreciated, that officers are, it may be simple, but that they're put in for awards, that they're recognized for a job well done, because they often do a wonderful job. So making sure that all of those are in place and that we do that on a regular basis to improve officer mental health. From a community standpoint, I do think I'm very intrigued by what Ann Arbor has in store, through ICPOC with the unarmed response model. I think that's great because too often here in recent years, mental health and homelessness have been criminalized, and often those two go hand in hand, mental health and homelessness. So diverting officers from that, I think, is critical, and seeing, and being able to collaborate on how that looks moving forward is something that intrigues me. But one example that I have with working with agencies and other people to ensure or to help with mental health issues and homelessness issues, I received a complaint just a few weeks ago, as a matter of fact. Some angry HOA members, one of our neighborhoods, they're down there in the southeast side of our jurisdiction, our area of responsibility. They had 3 individuals that were literally staying on the street corner. They were homeless. The HOA were upset. There were exposed needles on the ground. There was trash. They were worried about quality of life. And they wanted the individuals to get help. They said that they did not want them to be charged or arrested for anything, but they wanted us to take part in finding them a better place to go, not in front of their neighborhood. So I worked with our Houston Police Department homeless outreach team. We collaborated, my unit, their unit. We made some phone calls to different nonprofits. Those officers go out to that area, speak to the individuals, and I'm thankful to say that just last week, those 3, they were willing to receive services. They found housing. One of the great things I think about Houston is that we are really trying to tackle homelessness and mental health head on. We've housed 25,000 individuals. It's a massive undertaking at the city level with nonprofits, faith-based organizations, and other mental health professionals, because a lot of those folks need service. They need those resources. And so working together, centralizing databases has been a tremendous help. And that was just one example at my level of how we've been able to serve the community.
Thank you. That's the full set of our prepared questions. Are there council follow-ups? I guess I'll have one follow-up, and that is, you touched a little bit upon, well, not a little bit, you've touched upon sort of a culture of accountability and a culture of support. Can you talk a little bit about that connection, how you would in a department emphasize a culture of accountability, but also a culture of support?
Yeah, one of the great things and something that we've implemented in our department and something that is a best practice through the DOJ and their ideas on community-oriented policing are early intervention systems. So I think that touches upon both support and accountability, because if you're able to analyze, and it also goes back to data, collecting data, but officers, whether it's through looking at body-worn camera footage or other documentation where you see something doesn't rise to the level of taking necessary action on the disciplinary side, but there's some concerning notions that you see. Sorry, but some concerning items that you need to address as a chief. You make sure that those early intervention systems are in place. You create a structure where there's progressive discipline. You create redress, retraining, something along those lines where that officer is able to save his career. You're still accountable to the public, making sure that you don't just turn a blind eye to an officer that's going down a potential slippery slope. And I think in the long run, you've hopefully saved a career, and you're also making the community a better place by building up that officer.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Are there any other follow-ups? Yes, Councilor Cornell.
Just to follow up on Mayor Taylor's question around accountability, you mentioned ICPOC. Do you have experience working with a similar group through your work in Houston?
Yes. So in Houston, we have something similar to ICPOC. It's called the Independent Police Oversight Board. I think in its present state, it has 23 members. They do look at all complaints of excessive force, any sort of weapons discharge, any other critical incidents such as a death in custody. They have the ability, and they do look at any what we classify Class 1 or Class 2 internal affairs complaint. That runs the gamut of something small and administrative to something severe, and they do that in their current state. So once I complete a review of the internal affairs investigation at my level, then it moves over to a disciplinary committee where members of the Independent Police Oversight Board sit side by side with other sworn personnel. They look at it around a round table. They are authorized if something isn't to their liking. They have questions if they need that investigation sent back for further fleshing out, or they don't like, I guess, the ultimate determination. Then they have the direct ear to the mayor and the chief where they can have that reviewed. We also have instituted an Office of Police Accountability and Reform that is separate from the police department. And so it makes complaint filing, if a citizen so chooses, easier. And plus, they also have the direct line to the mayor and are able to make those policy and procedure requests or reviews if they feel it's necessary.
Councilmember Watson.
You talked a little bit about, well, first of all, thank you for coming. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us. But you talked a little bit about the training that officers have to go through and the number of hours. And could you talk a little bit about places where in your career, where you've seen either personally or within your department that training lead to results when officers are interacting with the community, and also potentially where community engagement has either led to more training or led to an improved policy or interaction in your community?
So I recently, thank you for the questions, but I just commended an officer about a month ago. I was reviewing some camera footage. He was called out to a home in our area. The parents were at their wits' end. It was an 11-year-old going through a mental health episode. I forget exactly what he was diagnosed with, but he was a rather large. He was a large boy for his size or for his age, and they could not contain him themselves. He was breaking walls, breaking items in the house, and so they ultimately decided to call us. Sometimes those situations in our country in the past, and unfortunately sometimes now, can end up bad. But I had to commend my officer in this particular situation because he did an absolutely tremendous job de-escalating. He is crisis intervention certified. He's gone through our department's de-escalation process, the training, and it took time, but he was able to use his presence, use his voice. He calmed the boy down, and I just thought he did a superb job of doing it. He was able to put him in the back seat of his patrol car. We took him for an emergency detention order, based on mental health concerns at the parent's request, and he was able to seek the treatment that he needed. So I had to commend that officer. Just it was a textbook situation that I wish that I could record and show to all of my people and department-wide, because it was just an outstanding work.
Other follow-ups? Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, thanks again for being here. So in your answer to discussing sort of transparency during high-profile events, one of the things that you had mentioned in terms of transparency was that need for communication, for access to information, and holding monthly briefings at the police station and making yourself accessible to folks. What steps have you taken to build trust with members of the community who would not feel comfortable coming into a police station, who do not trust the police department at large?
I would say, so one of the things about working for the Houston Police Department, in my area in particular, I work for a minority-majority department in a minority-majority area. So I understand and can recognize that there are individuals in my area that are apprehensive when they saw me be named the new commander of that area, just because of, not because of anything that we did at Southwest previously, but just the history of policing in general. So I recognize that. And so, again, one of the key things that I try to do is be accessible, get out there within the community. We have a particular park in our area. It's Townwood Park, if anybody is familiar with the southwest side of Houston. But it's a rather large city park, and twice a year we would have cleanups, or the city would hold cleanups, the community organizations out there. Sometimes it would be rather sparsely attended, but they always invited the police. They always invited our command. And from my knowledge and from what I was told, we hadn't shown up. I thought that it was important as a way to build trust, to go out there and to be a part of that, to help build those bridges. I took my son along, my 12-year-old. So he and I, we hopped in the car one Saturday morning, 8 a.m. We showed up, and the looks on individuals' faces, like they kind of did a double take, like what are you doing here? But that was a couple of years ago. But the trust and the relationships that helped build, I mean, it's just one example, but by getting out there and showing that I care about your community, not just policing it, but I want everybody here to be better, have a better quality of life, and we're all in this together. I think that really was just one example of making amends and building that trust within the department or within the community.
Any other follow-ups? Commander, thank you very much.
I appreciate it. Thank you all for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take a break and convene back top of the hour. How are you today?
Oh, I am excited to be here.
Excellent.
It's a great community.
We believe so too. Could you briefly introduce you? I've been asked to ask you to briefly introduce yourself for the folks on the screen, or the folks up there.
Well, I'm Chief Marcus Dudley, Jr. My last assignment was Chief of Police of Abilene, Texas. Previously had worked in Aurora, Colorado. Total service is 26 years as a police officer.
Thank you. So as I'm sure you've been briefed, we will have a set of questions that we'll run through. If there's time remaining after that set of questions has been completed, council members may have follow-ups, and so they'll roll with them until our time is completed or the questions are completed.
Okay.
Solid, thank you. So, first off, how have the principles from the 21st Century Policing Report impacted your leadership approach, especially in light of disproportionate harms suffered by people of color?
Well, I think the 21st Century Policing Report actually gave all folks who aspire to be chiefs an opportunity to see exactly what's required, recognizing not only our duties, our responsibilities to adequately serve our community by listening to our community, but also recognize that there is a component of a need to ensure the employee health and wellness of our folks that are out there doing the job, and that all of those steps are essential. It also really started to recognize that when communities talk about serving them adequately, it's not just about being a kind police officer, but it's about also recognizing there's a need to provide an opportunity for the community to be heard, for the community to know that police departments care, and for police departments to provide some explanation as to how decisions are made. And of course, departments have to do best practices. They have to adhere to the laws and adhere to the ordinances put forward by council, our elected officials. But ultimately, when decisions are made, that input, that full circle input, listening to your community is relative, and that's what my take on the 21st Century Policing did. It served as a model for how to police moving forward.
Thank you. Can you please discuss your approach to ensuring transparency, especially during high-profile incidents, including the role that the chief should play in communicating to the community?
Well, so I think most chiefs today understand the need to be transparent. And I think where the confusion lies for some chiefs is, how do you do that balance where you're being transparent, but you're not harming an investigation? The old rule of thumb was, after an incident happens, we're not saying anything because it could mess up the investigation. Or if it was something involving an employee misbehaving, we would say it's an employee personnel matter. We can't talk about it. And what our communities have said is that that's not acceptable. You either need to provide an explanation as to why you can't talk about it, describe the investigative process, describe what ordinance or law would prevent you from being able to talk about it. Otherwise, the public has a right to know. And it is a very, very delicate balance to understand, what you can and cannot say. That's what I think has helped me over the years, is my years of experience, having encountered a number of challenging situations. I feel like have equipped me to understand how to maneuver that, and to not take all the credit. I would also add that having a good legal team behind you, your city attorneys, to be able to provide advice about what you can and cannot say, having good police spokespersons to help you to understand how what you might say would impact our community, our public. But ultimately, I believe that you have to look much, much further down the road than what the situation is today. and to recognize that the consequences of not disclosing something to the public, being transparent, could be so significant that it outweighs the concerns that you have today about whether or not you're giving out too much information. And so you may be better off actually putting things out that some folks would cringe that you would do, but to preserve that trust in our community, it becomes absolutely essential to do so.
Thank you. Can you please discuss your approach to ensuring that there is a culture of accountability to the community and between officers?
We are much better off now than we were 26 years ago in terms of our abilities as chiefs to ensure accountability. We have a radio system that records and maintains radio transmissions, and when 911 calls are received, that is all recorded as a matter of record. We have body-worn cameras. While they don't always capture all of the right angles, and they don't always provide us all of the perspectives that an officer may have when they're making a decision, to a large extent, they have provided us the ability to at least, in most instances, be able to provide the public some situational awareness, which has benefited us. So we are much better off at being able to garner the facts and share those with the public in a way that allows us to make good decisions about how to hold folks accountable. Officers are still in the business of policing, which at times can render bad outcomes. And if our officers are doing it right and our community has an understanding of what they did, I'm sure our community will support the officers. But if we're getting it wrong, the expectation should be that a chief is going to hold that person accountable, and not just based on the merits of personal relationships or a person standing within an organization, but based on what precedent has been set in the past for how discipline is done. That should be weighed. If it's so egregious of an act, you shouldn't be bound by that as a chief, and you can go beyond in terms of how to hold folks accountable. But a part of getting back to one of your first questions about that building trust is that's where that accountability piece is important. People have to understand that, officers are not going to be above the law, and we're going to operate within the constraints of sanctity of human life and doing what's right by our community, even when we think no one is looking. And so, I think it's highly important as a chief to hold your folks accountable and then to be able to explain to the public what that is. Oftentimes when we hold people accountable, again, some chiefs will fall back on, well, it's a disciplinary matter. I can't discuss it. Now, I'll be honest, I don't know if there's laws in Michigan that will protect disclosing how a person is disciplined who is an employee of the police department. It's something I definitely want to understand better. But to the extent that I would be able to say what sort of discipline a person received, and the person who's aggrieved and made the complaint, to me, they should be afforded the opportunity to know what that discipline is.
Thank you. Acknowledging that all police agencies engage in training, we've still seen several instances of unjustified force across the country. Please discuss your views on de-escalation training or other measures to prevent out-of-policy use of force.
We are fortunate today with training opportunities to have organizations to which I belong, the Police Executive Research Forum, that provides training called ICAT training, integrating communications, assessment, and tactics. And that training really provides officers, it equips them with tools for how to weigh whether or not when we make contact with someone, we are acting within the constraints of laws, departmental policies, and are we being ethical? Are we being morally correct in what we're doing? And it requires a constant reassessment of how you are dealing with the situation. And when that training is applied over time, it begins to be instinctive. I have a 15-year-old daughter I'm teaching how to drive. And, she's still at that stage where she has to get in and analyze every single thing in the car to figure out where things are. I remember our first time on the highway, and she kind of locked up, she freezed, and wasn't comfortable applying the brake to back off of a car that we were approaching. And I had to talk to her very calmly and give her direction, and we pulled over, and we kind of debriefed it, and she said, "I don't understand, it's just too much." And this is a honors kid. She says, this is too much, I don't know how you do it. And I said, that's my nickname for my child. Mama's, over time, you won't even think about it. It'll just be something that you do. And that applies to the ICAT training for officers. Initially, I think it will take more senior officers a little bit of time to get used to get acclimated to understanding that it's okay to take a step back and reassess how you're handling a situation. And then to see what other tools there are to be able to de-escalate. But over a period of time, it'll be instinctive. It'll just be a natural part of what you do. I think that you not only have to bring that training about, but you have to make sure that your policies model what the training expects. And then not only your policies, but you also have to make sure that your department is branding that this is where we're at. This is what we do. And so ICAT needs to be plastered on poster boards and seen all over the place so people understand and identify that that's the culture of the organization. Even your internal affairs processes, your evaluations of personnel at the end of the year should have components of ICAT integrated within it so that people understand that at every aspect of what you do, that constant reassessment, that constant slowing things down and looking at what options you have is a part of what is expected in the job. And so I think that that's some essential training that I value and that I would want to make sure that we do a train-to-trainer process and get some instructors sent out to do that training and then make sure that that's incorporated throughout the organization to ensure that we're treating folks fairly.
Thank you. What experience do you have working and integrating with members of the LGBTQ+ community? And how would you make these community members feel safe and comfortable in their interactions with police?
During my time in Aurora, Colorado, it is politically a much more progressive state. We did, I was in charge of recruiting, and so we did a number of activities to include attending Pride events where we would actively hold our recruiting tent to try to make sure that we had representatives of the LGBTQ community who could basically know that we had folks on the department that looked like them and were not afraid or ashamed to identify themselves as such. And we had success in our recruitment opportunities. I was a division, I left there as a division chief, and my chief at the time had come out and it was known that that she was gay. And she was supported throughout the organization. It didn't matter, to the organization. I had a little bit of a different circumstance being in Abilene, Texas, which is a much more conservative state, conservative community. And even there, it was recognized throughout city administration and throughout us chiefs and public safety side that if there were events being held, that we would do outreach and to make sure that those events were carried out in a safe fashion and that folks knew that we were not going to discriminate in any way in terms of how we carried out our duties to ensure that they had the right to be able to enjoy themselves in the community. So while there were different approaches in terms of one community being a little bit more outward with its support and the other being more conservative. At neither department did we ever mistreat anyone or not respect their right as a citizen to be able to be who they are. And that's my direct experience.
Thank you. Please discuss steps that you have taken during your career to counter the effects of implicit bias.
So one of the things that it can be somewhat challenging when you're an African-American male in a leadership role is to champion making sure that people's rights are protected without some folks who you serve alongside feeling like you carry a bias in terms of the way you advocate for fair treatment. I remember recognizing that there were not enough African Americans in leadership positions working in Aurora, Colorado. And I felt that we could do better. And so once I had ascended through the ranks and had become very well schooled in how to go through promotional processes, I took it upon myself to do some outreach. I was intentional about not doing outreach to just the folks on the department who were African American. I also reached out to our female officers and as well as to some of our white male officers who I felt had leadership potential to be able to help the organization. And I offered to put on training sessions, free of charge, my time, my commitment, and he would even do one-on-one sessions. And I had great success with that. And what's neat for me is to be able to look back at that police department right now and to see that there are folks at the commander rank, folks at the lieutenant rank, who would likely not have been in those positions had it not been for me and some of the other folks that I organized to be able to sit down with those folks and help them to understand that you can achieve, you can get through these processes, and you can make a difference. I want to give you another example because it's more recent. This happened while in Abilene, Texas. Had a complaint from a citizen that indicated that they felt they had been followed around in a store. Turns out one of our white male officers felt like this gentleman looked like the description of a homicide suspect. Turns out this gentleman was not. This gentleman had been a previously convicted felon and had served time in prison and felt very uncomfortable with the way he was followed around. Ultimately, he got on the phone with one of our community activists who has my personal number and reached out to me and told me about what had taken place. I ended up having one of my lieutenants reach out to him. The conversation did not go well. The lieutenant gave him the impression that the department did not care about his concerns and that our officer operated within policy, so that's the end of it. I got more phone calls. I ultimately ended up reaching out to the gentleman myself and having a meeting set up. After hearing his story, I asked him, I said, hey, would you be willing to go on camera and tell your side of what happened? I said, so often I think our officers don't always understand the impacts that they have on a community member when this happens. So would you be willing to? And he said, yeah. So I brought my police spokesperson out and he did videotaping and we did a barbershop talk where we sat in a barbershop, got my hair cut, and we had a conversation about what happened in a more relaxed atmosphere. I reached out to the officer and told him what had taken place and asked him if he'd be willing to tell his side, his perspective. Told him I understand he didn't violate policy, but I think this is an important time for us, an opportunity to engage our community in a different way and also to be able to share with other officers the impacts of what we do. So we ended up videoing both sides. During our implicit bias training or anti-bias training, I ended up taking about 4 hours. 3 of that, we had collaborated with professors from Abilene Christian University who put on some training. I took the first hour, they took the last 3 hours, and they did a great job for us. But my hour was going over that video of both impressions of what took place and talking to officers about how would you feel if this were you, if this were a person who you had arrested that was following you around a store. Just being able to express to them and give them a different perspective. Afterwards, I heard from officers who expressed to me just how proud they were of that training, how much it was different than any other training that they had ever gone to. It wasn't just berate the officer, tell them they're wrong for being white and being privileged, and it was an opportunity for them to actually have a different perspective. It was an opportunity for empathetic growth. And I think there might be more questions where I can expand upon that. I would like to expand how I learned about empathetic growth and the value I have with that. But that was my experience with being able to put forthwith to our officers, all officers, exactly what implicit bias can be and look like, even when you think you didn't do it or intend to.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. The role of chief requires you to communicate with police employees, elected officials, the public, and other city agencies. Please discuss your style of doing so, touching upon steps that you have taken to improve your skills.
I think I was fortunate to ultimately have good teachers in our public school system that recognized my abilities. Beyond that which I even recognize for myself. And they encouraged me to step outside myself and to not be in the standard classes and to take honors classes. That pushed me to have to read more and to have to write more. That gave me a good foundation when it was time to accept a football scholarship and go to college to play football. I got slapped in the face when I took the ACT test to go to college, and I didn't score that as well as I would have liked to. And so as a football player, I was told that I needed to take an extra writing class as a freshman, as a part of my requirement being enrolled. I got good enough at writing in college to get my degree, a bachelor's of arts in business economics with a concentration in management and finance. I went to my first job as a financial analyst, and within the 5 years of working as a financial analyst, I had some great bosses that said, your writing is not very good for business writing. Your approach, your style, you write like you're doing a college paper, and so they taught me. I say that because those experiences taught me how to do more than just write a police report, where it's just the facts, ma'am. It taught me the value of words and how to be concise and succinct in your approach, how to be grammatically correct, how inept misspellings can be when you put something out. And so I learned a lot over the years in terms of how to be being a champion for writing skills. I've never shied away from being able to speak to folks, and I challenge myself to take on probably more than I should when it comes to public speaking engagements. So I think that I've been equipped over the years to be a consummate communicator. One of the things that I found challenging is that, I've become very, very focused on getting projects, getting things done. And so there are times when you'd like to communicate more, but due to time constraints, you can't always communicate as much as you'd like to. And that's where I've become much more effective at being able to utilize 5-minute videos, being able to get a newsletter out, those are other ways that you can communicate to your folks, both internally and externally, to let them know what's going on within the department.
Thank you. Can you cite an example of where you've helped your agency coalesce around a change of policy, protocols, or programs when the initial reaction was to resist the change?
I had a lot of great opportunities in Abilene, Texas, to bring a lot of new things to the organization in terms of partnership building. There is not a commission or a committee that provides police oversight in Abilene, Texas. But I did want community feedback. And I think there was a huge concern that inviting folks from the outside in a conservative community where law enforcement is very, very well supported, how that would appear, and would not have gone over very well. So I took a little bit of a different approach. There were a lot of community members, community leaders, who wanted to meet with me to figure out how they could collaborate with the organization. And it began to be overwhelming, the number of meetings that I was attending, and then I just finished one and someone wanted to get back on the books for another. And I finally just said, why don't we have one meeting once a month, the third Wednesday of the month, and we'll take 2 hours. And it won't be the Chief Dudley show. It won't be the Abilene Police Department show. It will be all of our first responder partners, both police and fire, ambulance, the military base, security forces, the federal partners, the FBI, U.S. Marshal's Office. All these folks were invited to come to the meeting and take a few minutes to talk about what's going on within their respective agency and areas. Can even bring up any challenges that they see us facing. The second hour, our community partners, our nonprofits, our clergy would be able to take that hour to also provide what's going on in their respective departments. And then whoever was the host agency or department or organization would be afforded some extra minutes for them to be able to give a presentation on exactly what their department does. So for example, if you're the United Way and you hosted the meeting, you could have a few extra minutes, 15, 20 minutes, to be able to do a presentation on what your organization does. The benefit of that is when you have challenges, like after we all came off of COVID, we were worried about kids. They were doing virtual learning, and then they went to school for a little while, and then they were all dismissed for summer. And so we thought we were going to have a pretty violent summer involving our kids. And I said we wanted to do a lot in terms of community engagement, but I needed the help of the community to do it. Folks don't always want to come to the police department for our events, especially many of the folks that we want to reach. So what if you all, community members, hosted something and we showed up? We ended up doing late night basketball because we know the kids wanted to be up late anyway in the summer. So we had a gym that we were able to bring them into, and officers played ball with them, and we had snacks and stuff for them. We did Movie with a Cop, where we were able to invite kids of all ages to come in and get some popcorn and a soda and begin a theater, and we actually watch a movie together. We had a teen academy that summer. I mean, we made outreach huge, and it wasn't something that just the police department did on its own. It was something that all the community got involved with, and that was directly a result of the collaboration with all of our community partners to make it work. And then I'll say one last thing on a collaboration that was challenging, and that is on homelessness. Our unhoused communities, in some respects, some community members, some department members, felt that we needed to just be heavy-handed. You know, let's get out there and if they're trespassing, if they're loitering, let's issue citations, let's make arrests. Let's be heavy-handed and get them out of the way. We ended up I formed a homeless outreach team where patrol officers were designated from each of the watches to go through specialized training so that they'd understand what resources in our community were available and be able to share those resources with folks that are unhoused. successful collaboration with different community groups to make that happen, as well as buy-in from our officers who figured out, man, these guys know more about what resources are available and have a better rapport with their in-house community than just the regular patrol officer who only saw him on this watch and now he's upset because he has to deal with the circumstance. So another one of those change of mindset moments.
Thank you. Can you please share your experience or philosophy around the use of police data to help your department be more transparent? Do you see any limitations in using data to solve problems?
I think at the forefront of my philosophy is that the use of data should be able to help us with operating effectively and efficiently, which is what I believe council wants me to do. That data should also be able to help us with our investigations. And that data can also serve the purpose of examining and allowing us to re-examine how we do things. So I think all three of those components need to be a part of the benefit of using data. One of the things that I bring to the table is a relationship with a really good friend of mine who owns a company called Force Metrics. And he was a former FBI agent and had, after the George Floyd situation, thought about his experience in law enforcement and felt there was something more that he should be able to do. And he reached out to me when I was a finalist for the chief job in Aurora, Colorado, and said, hey, I want to learn more about how we could work together because I just think that I was in cybersecurity for many years with the FBI. I went and operated my own company. I did very well. And I just think that there's so much more we could be doing to help you all with data. When I got to Abilene, Texas, he reached out to me and he said, you told me something once. And you said that if this idea can work in Aurora, Colorado, then proof of concept, it should be able to work anywhere to include in Abilene, Texas. I'm going to make a trip out there because I have an idea. And so he and I discussed, and one of the things we do well in law enforcement is we collect a lot of data. We maintain databases that have quite a bit in terms of identifiers of folks and their associates and what they're doing, and arrest records. And so one of the benefits of that data is for us to be able to better serve our community by protecting officers on the front lines. And how that works is if you've dealt with someone that has been in a mental health crisis and we have helped them through that challenging situation, but we know that they're hostile towards police, there's not an easy way for officers to be able to understand when they're responding to that call, unless they recall being there, that challenge could exist. There's not an easy way for dispatch to know that we're sending the right crisis intervention trained officer to go there. And so having a system that can quickly analyze that and let the officer see key points, key things that could help them to deal with that particular situation can be beneficial. And so that's the way in which you can use that information to be able to help you is in your deployment, your responses to call for service, to be aware of what challenges exist. I obviously have the concerns of any citizen of not wanting misuse of data, where I'm singled out and put in harm's way because the wrong information is put out there. And so obviously you have to make sure that your policies and the way in which data is being used are not only monitored, but policies prevent misuse of that, of the use of data analytics. I think that the other thing that can do is tell us, are we seeing increases in our responses for service to people who have certain things that would be of concern that we might be able to help them on the front end rather than putting a police response out there? Are we even deploying the right resource? That's the way that the collection of data and the analytics associated with the data can be used to be very, very beneficial. But we do have to have things in place that would prevent misuse. I'm not a fan of facial recognition technology. I think there's bias in the way that those programs work, and until those things are fixed, I'm not comfortable with use of that. And I'm not saying anything that's unusual for a chief to say. I remember some folks and some agencies still like to use polygraphs. And we've determined that polygraphs have faults and that they are not considered something that's admissible in court. So I'm not saying anything that we shouldn't already know.
Thank you. And this is the last formal question. How would you ensure the mental well-being of your officers? And please share an example of where you collaborated with outside agencies on mental health issues affecting the community.
In Abilene, as the chief, I recognized that we did not have a victims advocate for our adult victims of crime. We did a great job. We had multiple advocates for our children victims of crime. I felt there was a need, and I was supported by city administration with being able to hire a victims advocate. I also knew the financial limitations on being able to bring in outside employees. So I gave that position another responsibility, and that was an employee health and wellness coordinator. That person was responsible for coordinating our peer support program so that officers that have been through difficult situations, officers who had received training, could also serve as peer support for other officers that are involved in critical incidents. That person was also responsible for developing we call it CISM, Critical Incident Stress Management Debrief, so that after officers go out and respond to a very, very difficult call, say a child death, they don't come back, they don't go and write the report, and then at the end of the night, we take their keys, and then they go home, and that's the end of it. There's an opportunity for us to have that person sit down with a therapist and with a team of folks that responded to that call, and to be able to share the experience. And they oftentimes will end up finding out revelations that they didn't even know was going on because they had tunnel vision and were so focused on the tragic nature of what happened. So CISM was another thing that person was able to do. The person was also responsible for developing special events for officers and their families so that we could get together at either a picnic or Christmas time celebration so that officers could feel a part of a team of folks. And oftentimes these things were done with the support of our community partners. We didn't do these things alone. In fact, one of the things we did was a no-shave November where monies were fundraised to benefit the children of victims of domestic violence. And so at Christmas time, all that money was raised and used. And so it was an opportunity again for officers to develop that capacity for empathetic growth. You said that was the last formal question. So I've done some things to ensure employee health and wellness. One thing I would do to improve things is I learned being in Abilene, Texas, it had become at some point contentious between me and the association. They don't call it unions in Texas, it's association. Where I take ownership of that is had I not given up on some of those relationships, and had I put more into the communication aspect of things, and not just communication with the association or union leadership, but communication directly with the frontline troops, I think that it could have been a less contentious relationship. My fault in that is I came from a bigger agency, almost 800 officers in Aurora, Colorado, and as a head of an organization, you could not meet with everybody face-to-face on the front line, and you had to depend upon your subordinates to be able to communicate to the folks on the front line. That is different when you're dealing with a smaller organization. There is more of a need for the head of the agency to go out to the front lines and talk to folks and to direct communications directly to the folks that are on the front lines, as well as listening to the people on the front lines. I found when I did my ride-alongs with my officers, I found out more about operational inefficiencies than I ever would have thought in terms of where our body-worn camera system, the batteries were dying out on those things too quickly. We were losing connectivity with our MDCs because of batteries dying on those, and those all became significant technology enhancements that we were able to make, that I was able to present to council for funding because of the folks on the front lines and being there with them when they're doing the job. So I did learn some things in that, and it also helped improve the well-being of me and how I move forward. So I talked about empathetic growth, and I wanted to add this because it is something that is significant to me that I think is important to share in this day and age. I remember working in Aurora, Colorado, where we had an officer who had a person who was arrested that had to be hobbled. This person was very combative. They were hobbled. They were placed in the back seat of the patrol car. The back seats of the patrol car are made of plastic to try to, for safety and to not allow things to be hidden, contraband to be left behind. But this person who was hobbled in the back seat was not seat belted in. So as the officer began to drive back to the detention facility, at some point, this person who was in the back seat slid forward, and their head was wedged in between the driver's seat and the floorboard. And they were screaming for help. This can be heard on cameras or a camera in the car that play this out, where this person was yelling and screaming for help, and the officer ignored the cries for help. Could have simply pulled over, called for a backup car to assist with getting the person positioned right, or find a different mode of transportation, but simply did not respond. Ultimately got to the detention facility. This person was heard crying on the camera footage, saying she was so broken that it was no longer officer, please, and at some point could be heard saying, massa, please. We took, many of us took from that, something is wrong, that an officer would not be responsive to the cries of someone, even if you arrest them. And so the officer was sent to a psychologist, and ultimately the psychologist said, there's not a whole lot you guys can do. This person has lost their capacity for empathetic growth. I made it my purpose as the head of an agency to make sure that that opportunity doesn't happen again. That to the extent that we can encourage officers, get them to go out and be a part of their community, to get to know the folks that we serve, the value of that, so that we don't create another opportunity for an officer to lose their capacity for empathetic growth. So if you've heard me mention that quite a few times, because I think that that is a central theme in who I am and what we should be about in law enforcement today, is making sure that the women and men who we bring on our police department don't ever have the opportunity to lose their compassion, to lose their empathetic growth. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there follow-on questions from council members? Yes, I'll roll briefly. So you mentioned, and this links, I think, with perhaps your final statement with respect to empathetic growth. You've talked about a culture of accountability and the importance of accountability. You've also talked about, the need to support officers and perhaps in another term, also inculcate pride in the profession and the work that they do. How do you pull those things together?
Well, I think first I have to look the part. Our women and men who serve need to see that I'm not just advocating that they be the ones to represent the organization and that they see me out front leading the way. It's an easy thing for me to do because I love service. I think that so many times we are so much better than how we're projected on television, and some bad apples can ruin the whole barrel in terms of sometimes the national perspective of what law enforcement does. But I also think that getting back to ensuring training and policies, ensuring that the officers are heard, ensuring that the community is heard, and coming up with a strategic plan for how we move forward. Something that I could present to the city administrator. The city administrator could then best determine what is reasonable, what to pursue financially, and then us be committed to achieving those goals and objectives. And I think that that's where the buy-in is. When people understand where you're trying to go, understand what you're trying to accomplish, it's much easier for them to get on board with it. Obviously, you'll have those folks who will want to resist for whatever reason, and the train has to keep moving forward. And ultimately, those folks will make their own decision about what is in their best interest. Those who decide to get off the train, it's going to be important for us to recognize that that could be an opportunity to be able to bring in folks that understand the value and importance of us all moving in the same direction with the goal of providing great customer service to our citizens. So that would be my approach, is to have a strategy of having a plan, goals and objectives, and working towards achieving that by being out front and showing folks that I don't just talk about it, I live it.
Thank you. Are there follow-ups? Councilmember Watson.
Thanks again for your willingness to speak to us today, and I'm left with just a number of things to think about after, especially your last anecdote. I wanted to ask, earlier in a story, you mentioned getting a call from an activist in the community that kind of led you to understand an incident where an individual was being followed. How do you go about creating relationships with activists in the community, and then coming to a new community? How do you think that you'll foster that trust and respect, and find the voices that you want to seek out, and talk about maybe the ones that that might disagree too?
So I've said before that I don't believe that the folks in our community should be expected to come to us. And I say that because when I joined policing over 26 years ago, that was the expectation, is that you could sit and cross your arms and basically expect people to come to you with whatever their challenges were, or to want to be a part of the team, the department. That was the approach, and today that no longer is acceptable. The people that you want to reach, you have to meet them where they are. And the activist that I mentioned called me. She didn't have trust in the police when we first started to collaborate on things, but she saw that I had a willingness, and I was going to be intentional about being at her events. And she did a lot of events. In fact, she was the one that organized the Juneteenth celebration and did the fundraisers to bring about the food that would feed folks in our community. And she is the one who I collaborated with to say, let's do kickball with the kids. And then she'd see that, well, he didn't just come out and do his kickball thing, and then he was gone. He would come back, and he would spend hours at the event. He would bring his kids and his wife to the event. He integrated himself in the community so that it was clear that as chief, he was more than just about a show, and that he was authentic in his wanting to develop that trust. So that when our citizen made the complaint through the channels that we give our citizens, and there still wasn't satisfaction with the way the matter was handled, and she felt that it needed greater attention that might not be provided to me, the information might not have been provided to me in the way that it needed to, she felt comfortable that she could reach out to me. I intend to make myself available in that way here in our community here in Ann Arbor. And I realize that we won't always agree in terms of folks who have matters that they bring up, and they may not agree with my approach or the manner in which things will be accomplished. But as I talked about before, when I described wanting our community members to know that they have been heard, knowing, am I getting?
Please finish your thought, but
Okay.
have that be our last one.
Okay. Well, I'll speak. So in short, procedural justice is what I'm referring to. And so folks who disagree with me, they still are afforded procedural justice in terms of understanding how decisions are made and having input, and then understanding that even though we may disagree, we can still have love for each other.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming out to Ann Arbor.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Back at the top of the hour.
I'm doing just great, sir.
Excellent, thank you. Again, welcome.
Thank you.
I've been asked you to give a brief introduction of yourself. We all, of course, know who you are, but the people
Okay.
in the camera might not.
I'm Nathaniel Clark, and I am honored to be sitting before you today to be a part of this process, to be your next police chief of the great city of Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Well, thank you. And so now we will have a set of formal questions.
Okay?
The council members may have follow-ups on those questions, but those will be at the end of the complete set.
Okay.
And then when we have 50 minutes, and let's get the party started. So, again, welcome.
Thank you.
And so with our first question, how have the principles from the 21st Century Policing Report impacted your leadership approach, especially in light of disproportionate harm suffered by people of color?
Make sure I got it right. How have the principles of 21st century policing impacted my approach?
Yes.
Okay. You know, when we think about the 6 pillars of 21st century policing, these are key pillars. 21st century policing, let's go back and let's start talking about what is 21st century policing. If we don't know what 21st century policing is, we can't give a true assessment of how it has impacted our approach to policing. 21st century policing, in a short version, is the community coming together in collaboration with the police department to identify problems and identify solutions. In other words, strategic thinking. So how has the 6 pillars impacted my approach as far as ensuring service delivery? I believe in the 6 pillars of 21st century policing. There is a lot of problems that we solve from a police perspective are too complex for simply the police. We have to include the community. Some of the things I've done as far as modifying my approach as far as enhanced service delivery is I've created what I call the internal advisory board and an external advisory board. The external advisory board consists of citizens. Citizens who don't mind coming together with us, whether we're doing a strategic action plan, whether we're making some changes within the department, whether we're reviewing policies and procedures to ensure they complement best practices. Guess what? We have the citizens at the table. At the end of the day, we're delivering an enhanced level of service delivered to the community. We have to have the community's input. That advisory board gives the citizens a voice in the day-to-day operation and the direction of this department. We treat our citizens as equal partners with the utmost respect, and we ensure that they feel valued, that their comments, that their concerns are valued. That changed the entire trajectory as the way we deliver law enforcement services to our community. It's what I call a shared vision approach. That's how I deliver services now, shared vision approach, where I'm bringing in the internal staff, tapping into their experience, tapping into their ideas on how we can make things better, and bringing in the community. What are your needs? Give us a report card. And I'll give you another example, sir, is that I've created what I call non-enforcement citizen contacts. For example, Operation 1050. Every 50 minutes, if an officer's not on call, we expect that officer to get out the car and make contact with the community. What are we doing right in your opinion? And what can we do differently in your opinion? These are just some of the things that we're doing as far as enhanced service delivery toward the community. Everything we do, sir, has to be community driven. And I'm gonna close on this particular point, Mayor. You know, I completely embrace the philosophy of community-oriented policing. And as your police chief, I want to take it one step further and do what we call neighborhood policing, where we go into the neighborhoods one block at a time, delivering services. And we modify our service based on the needs of the community. You know, law enforcement is constantly changing around the department, and we have to have leadership in place that's willing to be open-minded, a good listener, a strategic leader, one that leads by example, and one that is open to change. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you please discuss your approach to ensuring transparency, especially during high-profile incidents, including the role the chief should play in communicating to the community?
You know, sir, that's a good question. Transparency and building trust is the key to any successful organization. There is no way that any police department can be successful in this day and age without being transparent. And I use the acronym of DEI: diversity, equity, and inclusion, integrated with what I call constitutional policing. Constitutional policing talking about the Fourth Amendment, talking about de-escalation and use of force. These are some of the things that we have to do as far as building that transparency. Again, we talked earlier about creating those advisory boards, giving the community a voice in the day-to-day operation of the police department. If you can imagine for one moment, sir, if the community decides we have a police department that's not transparent, we have a police department that's not even legitimate, and we have no trust and confidence in our police department, and we're not going to allow you to police us. If the community gets to that level, guess what, sir? It's hard to police a community that does not want to be policed. So it's key, it's critical that everything we do in good faith, we have to be transparent above board. If we make mistakes, let's talk about it. Let's learn from our mistakes that we won't do that again. But we should never get to the point where we're hiding the facts from the community. As your police chief, when we start talking about high-level incidents, it's incumbent that the chief is the face of the police department. He or she needs to be out front. First and foremost, if you've got a critical incident, you ensure that the city manager is abreast. You ensure that the governing body is abreast. Because what you don't want to do, sir, or any members of this governing body, you don't want to be blindsided. If we have a critical incident, you need to know the particulars. And it's my job to ensure that the city manager knows, and then at some point, we got to make sure that you know. But the police chief needs to be out front, along with his or her executive team. We need to be out front explaining to the community why we did certain things or why we didn't do certain things and what action we're taking to address their concerns. But transparency is the key, because think about it, without transparency, again, we cannot effectively police this community or any community, because the community won't have no trust in us.
Thank you. Can you please discuss your approach to ensuring that there is a culture of accountability to both the community and between officers?
Yes, sir. My approach as far as accountability, and I sir, strongly believe in accountability, especially when it comes to law enforcement. We do several things internally. We ensure that the officers are provided with the tools, the training, and the equipment they need to be successful. We ensure that we have policies and procedures in place that complement best practices. We ensure that our goals are what we call SMART specific. SMART. They're specific, they're measurable, they're attainable, they're realistic, and they're time-bound. And we hold our officers to the highest ethical standards. Think about it. We've given them the tools they need, we've given them the training, and we've given them the technology and equipment. Now we're going to hold them to the highest ethical standards. When we go out into the community, everything we do, sir, in good faith, has to reflect the will of the community. That's why I stated earlier that, yeah, I embrace community policing, but let's take it one step further. Let's start doing what I call neighborhood policing now, where we're going into the community, one block at a time, and we're modifying our service delivery to ensure that we're addressing the needs of the community. We do that by ensuring, another way, sir, is to ensure that the community have a voice at the decision-making table in everything we do, that they feel valued, they feel appreciated, and they feel that they're treated as equal partners. We do that by going to the schools, the churches, the civic organizations, the neighborhood meetings. We need to be visible. After all, our citizens and our guests are the most important asset in this city. Without them, there will be no need for us. So we have to go that extra mile to ensure, sir, that everything we do, we are transparent, it's trustworthy, and we're held accountable for our actions as well as our inactions.
Thank you. Acknowledging that, that all police agencies engage in training, we've still seen several instances of unjustified use of force across the country. Please discuss your views on de-escalation training or other measures to prevent out-of-policy use of force.
Sir, I concur. We can see it taking places on the television. Use of force. Whether it ends in deadly force or it ends in physical injury, we can see it taking places around the country. And some of it, in my opinion, is justifiable. Some of it is not. But in any case, everything we do in good faith has to reflect policy, state law and federal law. We have to be in compliance. So what we have to do, sir, let's start back with policy. You know, I talked earlier about everything that we do. We have to take the approach that sometimes we have to go back and revisit our policies. When we do, we bring the senior staff, the internal staff to the table, and we bring the community to the table. And we make sure that our policies reflect best practices. That's something we have to do. Then we go one step further. We're ensuring that our officers get continuous training. You know, I talked about the acronym of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, encompassing all constitutional policing. So when we start talking about constitutional policing, that's roll call training on a continuous basis, and it's talking about de-escalation, the do's and don'ts. It talks about use of force, the do's and don'ts. And then, sir, we hold our officers accountable, because think about it, we've given them the training. We've given them the tools and equipment that they need. We have to hold them accountable for doing the right thing. Based on my research of this department, sir, you have a good department, a department that's full of hope and full of promise. And all we have to do is continue to ensure that they get the proper training and tools and equipment that they need. You know, I want to say this. When I came in Sunday, I just kind of started walking up and down the sidewalk, talking to people, asked them about the department. Positive reviews. You know, the one thing that I heard is we like to be more inclusive. And I concur. At the end of the day, this is your department. This is the department that serves the community. So everything we do, sir, as far as, you know, we have to have continuous training. Training is paramount. It's kind of like my mother used to always say, a successful education opens the doors to many opportunities that otherwise would be closed. Law enforcement is constantly evolving. And we have to keep up with this evolving process through training, through equipment, and through technology. That's something that we have to do. We have to keep pace with the changing times in law enforcement.
Thank you. What experience do you have working and interacting with members of the LGBTQ+ community? And how would you make these community members feel safe and comfortable in their interactions with police?
You know, sir, I tell people all the time, as police chief, you know, I'm not police chief to the African-American community. I'm not police chief to the Caucasian community. I'm police chief to the entire community. Each and every citizen is a vital part of this community. Everybody has to be ensured fair and equitable treatment from law enforcement. This is paramount to our success. It's incumbent upon me to, when I start talking about going to churches and civic organizations, guess what? When they have meetings, I have to be present, because I'm their chief too. And we have to instill in my officers that what's going to be tolerated and what's not going to be tolerated. What's going to be tolerated is we treat all citizens with the utmost respect. We treat all citizens with fairness. And we treat all citizens as our equal partners, regardless of their sexual orientation or their religion. Everybody has to be treated fair across the board. We have to deliver a level of services to this entire community that's second to none. And it can't be any other way. Because think about it, if we start getting to the point whereas I'm going to treat somebody different because of their sexual orientation, then what does it stop? We don't have that authority to treat people indifferent because of their sexual orientation or their religion or their race. Everybody has to be treated the same. That's by foremost, that's paramount, to treat everybody the same. And when we do that, give everybody equal protection, guess what? We're on a win-win for this entire organization, and our department is on a win-win when we do that. Because guess what? We'll get enhanced community support. And that's how we're successful as getting community support and support from the governing body.
Thank you. Please discuss steps that you've taken during your, your career to counter the effects of implicit bias.
Okay. First and foremost, I think it's paramount. We talked about continuous training. We have to have continuous training for our staff. We have to have policies and procedures in place that addresses biasness. And we have to hold our staff accountable. And then another thing that I've done, sir, is that in our performance appraisal, I took and made part of our performance appraisal and put biasness in our performance appraisal that we can be evaluated on it. In other words, the officer, he or she knows, I'm going to be evaluated on this. This is part of my performance appraisal. So it's in their performance appraisal. And then what we do is, sir, is we have meetings in the roll call to talk and address these biases. And then I want my staff, especially my supervisory staff, to receive that enhanced training so he or she can monitor these biases and take the appropriate action. It's just in our best interest, again, I keep saying that everybody is treated with the utmost respect and treated fair.
Thank you. The role of chief requires that you communicate with police officers, elected officials, police employees, the public, and other city agencies. Please discuss your communication style, touching upon steps you've taken to improve skills.
My communication style, sir, is that I feel as though that I'm an effective communicator, whether it's in writing and or orally. Some people say, well, Clark, you love to talk. I said, well, I'm a Baptist preacher, and we often talk a lot. Sometimes we talk too much. But my role is to be an effective communicator. But in order to be an effective communicator, sir, I have to be a good listener. Listen to the concerns of my staff, of the governing body, and most importantly, our stakeholders in the city. Listen to their concerns, and then take the prompt action to address their concerns. Again, treating people with respect. Letting people know that when they have a concern and bring it to me, that I'm going to be mindful of their concerns, I'm going to address their concerns, then I'm going to go back and give them feedback. Because think about it, sir. If I address your concern, but I don't give you feedback, some people will be able to perception, he's not concerned about me. So I have to provide follow-up and give feedback to let you know that I took your concern seriously. I have to be, when we're going to events, be committed, be committed to ensuring that I'm prompt and that I'm taking seriously my responsibility as police chief. I have to be visible in the schools, the churches, the civic organizations. I have to be visible. I can't just work from 9 to 5. And I'll give some examples. In every job I've had, they always say I'm the chief that don't sleep. It's nothing for me to show up at 12 a.m. roll call. Not to micromanage my staff, but to show them that I'm concerned, and so when they ask for certain things, that I got to feel why they're asking for this. It's nothing for me to come out at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and find out who's in zone 1 or who's in beat 2. Tell them to come to the station, I'm going to ride along with them for a while. Again, not to micromanage, but to have a feel when they start asking for certain equipment, for certain training, that I got to feel this is why they need this. I have to do the same thing for the community. I have to be visible in their activities. We just have to be visible. And that's how we make changes being an effective communicator, by living up to our commitments, by treating people with respect, and by ensuring that the officers attend various meetings. You know, throughout my tenure as police chief, if you was assigned to beat 1, if there was a community meeting in beat 1, you had to go to that community meeting. If there was an activity taking place in beat 2 and you was assigned beat 2, you had to go to that activity in beat 2. That's how we build those relationships, and that's how we, what I call making deposits in our community's bank on a daily basis. You see, sir, we cannot make a withdrawal if we don't ever make deposits. We have to make deposits in our community's bank because in law enforcement, it's not about if something is going to happen. It's normally about when it's going to happen. And if you hadn't made deposits, you cannot make withdrawal from the community's bank if you haven't made deposits. So we have to make deposits on a daily basis and be effective in our communication with the public.
Thank you. Can you please cite an example of where you've helped your agency to coalesce around a change of policy, programs, or protocols when the initial reaction was to resist the change?
Yes, sir. I got one particular in mind. When I first took over police chief of the last agency I was affiliated with, you know, my first, I call that first 120 days critical, because I was going and talking to as many officers as I possibly could, addressing their concerns. What do they think? What, in their opinion, what can we do to enhance our service delivery? What can we do to make things better for the men and women of the department, whether you're sworn and or civilian staff? I want them to know that I'm going to lead by example and that I care about what's important to them. And then I start going into the community, surrounding law enforcement agencies, Chamber of Commerce, just talking to people in general. What can we do as a law enforcement agency to make things better for you? And sir, I can remember I was in a church service one Sunday, and when the pastor got through preaching, he said, well, we're going to take up this next collection because we got to pay for all these tickets that the department is giving. Didn't quite know what he was talking about. Medium-sized church, but the parking lot was real small. So I went outside. He said, well, let's come outside, Chief. I'm going to show you what's going on. I went outside and I drove a black Tahoe. All the vehicles that were parked alongside the roadside on the street had tickets, including my black Tahoe. I was in shock because they said we had a program called Give a Christian a Ticket Sunday. This is a program that had been in place way before I got there, and I just was in disbelief. Went back, talked to my staff, and we found out that that program was actually in place, Give a Christian a Ticket Sunday, where we were just targeting Christians. We were going to the churches targeting Christians, giving them citations. I was in disbelief. You know, and I started talking to my staff, we just can't do this. This is not in our best interest. This is not a good policing strategy. It's just not good for us. Faced a lot of pushback, sir, because think about it. A new police chief, and which the department had been doing this for the last 10 years or so, and I'm coming in making some change, making a drastic change. Well, we can't give a Christian a ticket on Sundays anymore. So I caught a lot of pushback. And then so what I started doing, sir, is I had to stand my ground because it was in our best interest. It was constitutionally unsound. We just could not do this. So what I did, sir, is we started having what I call those meetings. Bringing in the public, bringing in my staff. And we started showing them this is not in our best interest to have a program of this magnitude where we're targeting people because of them being a Christian. We just cannot do this. Still had some pushback, even though some of the officers that were pushing back did the analysis. They did analysis based on the arrest, based on the citations. So we had the evidence in hand. We knew this was happening. There was still pushback because it was ingrained. It had been happening for so long. It was accepted practice. So again, by having those community meetings, by having my staff there and talking about inclusiveness, talking about what's in the best interest of the department, talking about the involvement of this department, how we have to change. This is not a good practice for us. It does not complement best practices. And we eventually changed that process. That process ceased. And our accolades from the community, our support from the community went through the roof. But, you know, in this day and time, we just cannot have a process of Give a Christian a Ticket Sunday. It just is in nobody's best interest. And I can remember catching a lot of heat because I shut that down.
Thank you. Can you please share your experience or philosophy around the use of police data? Pardon me, I'll rerun it. Can you please share your experience or philosophy around the use of police data in helping your department be more transparent? Do you see any limitations in using data to solve problems?
Okay. Sir, you know, we're living in an age now what we call data solution driven. A lot of problems we solve is through collected data. What I did, sir, is I know that that's paramount. In the last 2 departments I've been involved with, I had a crime analyst. His or her job was to utilize the data collected and then come back and give us what we call the projected hotspots, the time of day that we look for another crime to take place, the day of the week, who's that crime possibly going to be committed by. So we took all that crime trends data based on the reports, and then what we did is we reached out to other agencies, and we came up and we pooled our resources as far as the crime trends data, utilizing the crime analysts for crime projections. And then we started putting our officers in those hot spots, and it worked as far as reducing crime. Then we came back and we saw that we was having some increase as far as some of the violent crimes, especially the use of guns and drugs. We created, based on, in part on this crime trends data, we created what we call a cage unit. We had the county police department, then we had the municipal agencies within the county. Now, be mindful, at that particular time, I was chief of the largest municipal agency in the county. We all put resources. Cage unit, criminal apprehension and gang enforcement. You know, we started seizing fentanyl. In fact, we, on one particular case, we seized enough fentanyl that probably could have taken out the entire population of my city at the time. But it worked based on the crime trends data. We're living in a society now that we always have to be one step, hopefully 2 or 3 steps of the criminals. We have to maximize our use of technology, and part of that maximize our use of technology is relying on that crime trends data. When you start talking about transparency, and we talked earlier, sir, that everything we do in good faith, we have to be transparent with the community. We're dealing with an educated community. And if we go out there and do anything other than being transparent, we're doing a disservice to the department, we're doing a disservice to the community, and the community is going to see through us. If we're transparent with the community, we're treating them as equal partners, and they have trust in us and they believe that we're legitimate, it's going to reciprocate. If we do anything other than that, then we'll lose support of the community.
Thank you. And finally, our last formal question, how would you ensure the mental well-being of your officers? And share perhaps an example of where you collaborated with outside agencies on mental health issues affecting the community.
You know, sir, if I can go back to the 6 pillars of 21st century policing, you know, I talked about earlier that oftentimes we'll focus on policies, we'll focus on media relations, we'll focus on enhanced technology, we'll focus on training, but most of the time, we don't focus on officers' wellness. That's the key to the rest of the 5 pillars. Think about it. If I come to work physically ready for the job, but I'm not ready mentally, guess what? My action can cause an officer to get hurt, or my action can cause a civilian to get hurt because I'm not mentally prepared. What we have to do is we have to do a little bit more focusing on ensuring that the officers are mentally ready to go what I call in service when he or she come to work. How do we do that? We do it through training, whether it's crisis intervention training or in-house training. We do that. We ensure we have EAP programs and other programs aimed at the mental fitness of an officer. And then we have to put policies and procedures in place that if an officer requires this type training, he or she going to have the utmost confidentiality. We can't come back and talk about it. And then we have to ensure that our supervisors are trained on how to monitor mental unreadiness and take the appropriate action to ensure that the officer's colleagues are getting the best services, but most important, to ensure that the community is getting the best services. When we started doing this, sir, that as police chief in the past, I have formed partnerships with other agencies, especially with the county and other municipal agencies on addressing these type of issues. What will we do? So we start reaching out to what I call the subject matter experts. We start reaching out to social services and psychologists. We start reaching out to them for help, because a lot of problems that we try to solve alone are too complex for police department to solve alone. So we reach out to the subject matter experts to help us in this area. An officer has to be mentally ready when he or she put that uniform on, and especially get in that police car to deliver a level of services. When you or anybody on the dais call for police services, you should have already in your mind set that when that officer responds, I'm gonna get a level of service that's second to none. You're not gonna get that service if mentally the officer's not ready. And a lot of times in this profession, especially back in the day, we had that, what we call that macho effect, or the SPS, the secret police stuff. It didn't work 10 years ago, and it won't work now, because we're human. And at some point in our careers, we all probably need to sit down and talk to somebody in our careers. Because in law enforcement, sir, we see so much. We have to deal with so much. And sometimes the stress can become enormous. But in this job, it's a rewarding job, yet it's a challenging job, and we have to be mentally ready for this job when we go 10-8.
Thank you. Councilmember Harrison.
Thank you for speaking with us today. My follow-up question is number 4, the fourth question, where we've seen several instances of unjustified use of force across the country. In reference to use of force, you said, and I quote, some of it is justifiable. Can you give us example or talk a little bit about where use of force is justifiable versus when it is unjustifiable?
Well, when I say use of force is justifiable, I'm talking about, ma'am, was when we're called and we have to stop the threat of an innocent third party getting hurt, or force that could cause deadly force. And I'll give you a prime example without naming a particular city. We had officers respond to a call. When the officers responded, we had the suspect had a female kind of like in a chokehold. She was on the floor. And at some point, he started stabbing her in the neck. She was hollering and screaming, he's stabbing me, he's stabbing me. The officer was giving verbal commands, drop the knife, drop the knife. He was not listening. At some point, ma'am, she fell over to one side, and the officer stopped the threat. And it turned out to be, it was deadly force, but they had to stop that threat. We made sure that the officers got help, treatment. We made sure that the prosecutor was contacted. We made sure that we did a thorough investigation, both criminal and internal. And it was ruled a justified use of force because we were trying to stop that threat. Had we not taken action, that young lady probably would have lost her life because he was stabbing her. Now, when we start talking about, unlawful or unjustifiable use of force, and I can give you a scenario, and if you make a traffic stop, it's just a misdemeanor. And all of a sudden you look around and somebody's laying on the ground dead. Okay, so how did a traffic stop end up to being deadly force? That's something we have to look into. And we have to take that serious. How did that happen? But I know on the other particular incident, whereas the officer responded, we had to stop the threat. No officer, in my opinion, in good faith, want to take a life. But we know sometimes we have to stop that threat, because if we don't stop the threat, innocent people could get hurt if we don't stop the threat. Nobody wants to take a life.
Thank you.
Councilmember Cornell.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
When you spoke about data, you talked about transparency and trust, and you talked about being able to pool data with other agencies to inform deployment of resources. And I'd like to hear a little bit about how you use data to inform when an unarmed response is appropriate in a situation. And in a follow-up to that, you talked about with the mental health of police officers that sometimes you need to call in subject matter experts to inform those decisions. And I wonder how you would also, engage and who you would consider to be a subject matter expert in unarmed response.
Okay. Let me make sure I got it right. We're talking about using the data to, let me get it right, to work with other agencies as far as mutual support?
To determine when an unarmed response is
Okay.
appropriate.
Okay. Well, ma'am, and I know I've read some of the data that the city just approved. I think it's come up with civilian people to work with unarmed responses, if I'm correct. And, I know now in the departments that I came from, it's just a little bit different. So if you call in to dispatch and you're just saying it's a person on the street, he or she is being belligerent or they're being uncooperative, then dispatch is going to notify the officer on the street, let them know this is what you're dealing with. Departments around the country now are doing things a little bit different. They're doing something like, because this council here is progressive. I'm just going to tell you that you are a progressive council when you start talking about those unarmed response teams. A lot of departments still have where they're sending armed officers. So what we're doing now is we're collaborating with like the sheriff department, because we just use, for example, Cobb County. Cobb County has a municipal police department, it has a county police department, and then it has a sheriff's department, because it's almost like two county agencies in a municipal. So what we do is that we might call in those other units, but now is that we found out that we need to start doing things a little bit different. I talked to you about the department beginning to evolve around the country. We have to change the way we do business. And a lot of people are using the skill sets of psychology, and they're hiring civilian staff to come in and respond to those calls. But even though they respond to those calls, the law enforcement component is still kind of like somewhere in the area in case things go wrong. Can you imagine that if you just have a person on the street that has some mental challenges or that has some drug-related issues, they would probably relate to somebody that's unarmed quicker than they probably will somebody that's armed. Because sometimes when we go there that's armed, it's almost like some people want to escalate. And they almost challenge you, shoot me. They'll do that. So can you imagine if you sent somebody there that was unarmed? Can you imagine just how it would be? In my opinion, and based on what we're seeing taking place around the country, they're relating to the individuals that's unarmed more than they are to the ones that's armed. And it's kind of odd that you asked that question, because I was in a restaurant Sunday when I got in town. And a young man was, well, not a young man, was an elderly guy was talking about police response to certain incidents. And he was talking about when the police comes to a scene, then it's almost like they're challenged. It's almost like that threat was shoot me, you got the gun, shoot me, and they'll become a little bit more aggressive than if you have civilian there. Most of the time, because the civilian is subject matter experts, they're trained to kind of talk to them to de-escalate. And I talked about earlier, some incidents that we deal with in a law enforcement perspective, we have to, but some incidents are a little bit more complex, and we do need subject matter experts. But oftentimes, when the departments don't have those subject matter experts, we have to respond. And that's why now we're giving their officers enhanced training. Enhanced, we'll just say, crisis intervention training, stress-related training. We're giving the officers enhanced training on what to look for, what to do, what to say, what not to say. Because we don't want the situation to escalate. We want to de-escalate. So I hope that answers your question.
Further questions from Councilmember Harrison?
My question is about your special unit, the cage unit. I believe criminal, is it apprehend?
Criminal apprehension and gang enforcement.
Apprehension, gang enforcement. Can you talk a little bit about kind of how you came up with cage? What was the thought process behind?
Well, when we met collectively as chiefs within the county, municipal chief and the county police chief, we had to come up with some name for this particular unit. And so we had several names that we kind of threw around. So we thought about, okay, let's come up with a cage unit. Because think about it, we was focused on violent crime, so criminal apprehension, and we were focused on gang enforcement. And we also was augmenting field operations. In other words, today, if you're having problems, we just say in Ann Arbor, this unit may be in your city. Tomorrow, I may have some problems in Flint, because I'm next door. They might be in my particular area. They was rotating. Wherever they was needed, that's where they went. But everybody had resources. So this is just a name we came up with, and the group agreed to it. And then what we did is we went back, pursuant to the name we come up with, and pursuant to our goals and objectives, each one of us went back to our respective city managers, our respective governing bodies, and we kind of share with them, this is what we're trying to do. We got buy-in from them. Then we started talking to people in the community to get buy-in. And it worked. When we started taking those guns off the street, the drugs off the street, and we started seeing some of our violent crime on a decrease, it worked. It worked, man, because guess what? We didn't just do it on our own. We got buy-in. See, when you get buy-in, it's hard for you to come back and argue about something that you concurred with. We got buy-in. We got feedback. And it worked. So we had numerous names initially, and then we all kind of agreed on this one because it kind of like fit what we was trying to do within our respective communities.
Thank you.
Okay.
Other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Grateful for your coming to Ann Arbor.
Okay. And I would like to conclude just by thanking each one of you for allowing me the opportunity to participate in this process to be your next police chief. This means the world to me, and I just want to thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
We now come to public comment general time. Public comment general time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council or the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment general time in connection with a work session, you need not have signed up in advance. Speakers in all instances will have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time. Our clerk will notify you when 30 seconds are remaining and when your time's expired. When your time has expired, please conclude your remarks and cede the floor. Is there anyone in-house who would like to speak at public comment? Is there anyone online who would like to speak at public comment?
Mayor, I don't see anyone with their hand raised.
Seeing no one, public comment is closed. Are there communications today from council? Seeing none, motion to adjourn. Moved by Cornell, second by Councilmember Ryer. Discussion? Favor? Opposed? We're adjourned.